Tonight we stand before a small piece of baked clay, no larger than a human hand, and let it trouble the darkness gently. In 1906, during excavations connected with ancient Nippur, scholars recovered fragments that helped reveal a strange Sumerian memory of kings who ruled before a devastating flood. Later, tablets and copies held in great museum collections allowed historians to compare broken lines, missing names, and impossible reigns. The Ashmolean Museum, the British Museum, and university scholars working from ancient Mesopotamian texts all helped preserve this quiet puzzle. Records confirm that the Sumerians were among the earliest people to write history in a lasting form, using wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay. You do not need to rush toward an answer. The clay itself has waited for thousands of years. It can wait a little longer, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while the room grows softer around you, write where you are listening from and what the local time is where you live. Somewhere, perhaps, another listener is awake under a different sky, hearing the same old river move through the dark. You are not entering a palace of polished certainty tonight. You are entering a storeroom of fragments. Some are chipped, some are burned, some carry only a few lines, like the last words of a dream remembered too late. Yet together, these fragments whisper of a world divided into two ages. One age belongs to ordinary kings, city walls, quarrels, harvests, and priests counting barley in temple courtyards. The other age lies further back, behind a curtain of water, where rulers are said to reign for tens of thousands of years. It sounds absurd at first. Of course it does. A king ruling for 28,000 years is not a normal political career. Even the most ambitious official would probably ask for a chair. Yet the Sumerian scribes copied these numbers carefully. They placed them within a sequence. They gave them cities, names, and order. They were not scribbling random fantasy in the margins. They were preserving a structure. Your mind drifts towards southern Mesopotamia, where the land lies low and wide beneath a pale sky. The rivers carry brown water through reeds, marshes, and fields of grain. Mud brick walls soften in the heat. Boats slide slowly along canals, their hulls creaking against wet ropes. Somewhere nearby, a scribe sits cross-legged with a reed stylus in his hand. The clay tablet before him is damp, cool, and heavy with possibility. He presses one mark, then another. Each wedge enters the clay like a tiny wound, but the wound becomes memory. That is the strange mercy of writing. It injures the surface and preserves the voice. The central mystery begins with a statement both simple and vast. Kingship descended from heaven. That phrase appears in the tradition of the Sumerian King List, a text known from later copies but rooted in a much older worldview. It does not explain itself like a modern textbook. It simply announces a beginning. Rule, order, measurement, and authority come down from above, and the first cities receive them. Here, history and myth do not stand on opposite sides of a wall. They lean into one another like tired travellers. Archaeologists can point to real cities, real temples, real layers of settlement. Scholars from institutions such as Oxford and Yale have long studied how Mesopotamian texts use mythic language to describe political order. Yet the question remains open among specialists. Does the pre-flood sequence preserve a distorted memory of early rulers, a sacred model of civilization, or something stranger within the ancient imagination? Perhaps the safest answer is also the most haunting. The tablets preserve what the Sumerians believed was worth remembering. That is enough to matter. You settle deeper into the story, and the night around you begins to resemble a museum gallery after closing time. Glass cases fade into shadow. Labels become unreadable. Only the clay remains visible, small and brown beneath a thin wash of light. You can almost smell dust, old paper, and polished wood. There is a faint chill in the air. The the sort of chill that belongs to rooms where dead languages sleep. Then comes the unsettling part. The Sumerian timeline does not begin with humanity proudly discovering civilization by itself. It begins with an arranged world. There are gods, there are cities, there is a system. Humans appear later in many Mesopotamian stories, not as masters of creation, but as workers placed inside a cosmic economy. That idea may feel uncomfortable, especially when you are trying to relax. History, however, has always had terrible manners. In some later Mesopotamian myths, people are fashioned to perform labour the gods no longer wish to bear. They dig canals, maintain temples, offer food, and keep the world functioning. The theme is not modern science, and it is not a simple historical report. It is a religious explanation for why life is difficult, why work is endless, and why human beings feel both necessary and fragile. A quirky fringe tidbit, often repeated in modern circles, claims that the tablets describe advanced beings engineering humanity like a forgotten experiment. That reading is far more modern than ancient, and it often stretches the texts until they squeak. Still, its popularity reveals something interesting. People keep returning to these tablets because they sense a hidden architecture inside them. They feel that the ancient scribes were not merely telling stories, they were arranging time. The Sumerian King List is especially powerful because it does something bold. It divides the human past with water. Before the flood, kings reign for immense spans. After the flood, kingship descends again, but the world feels altered. Time becomes smaller. Rulers become more human. Cities compete. Dynasties rise and fall. The enormous dream narrows into politics. You can hear the change almost like music. First, a deep note held for ages, then shorter notes, then the quick tapping rhythm of ordinary life, barley, bricks, debt, marriage, war, repair the canal, count the sheep, send the messenger, complain about the neighbour. Humanity, apparently, has always been very busy being humanity. Yet the earlier note lingers, long before recorded history, in a time that is no longer remembered. The tablets say there was order before the order we know. There were cities before the familiar cities. There were names before the names that archaeology can comfortably hold. The claim is not easy to accept literally, and it should not be forced into certainty. But as a window into ancient thought, it is extraordinary. The clay does not shout. It does not demand belief. It simply waits while each generation reads itself into the cracks. Mainstream history gives us firm ground. Writing emerges in southern Mesopotamia during the late 4th millennium before the Common Era, first for administration, accounting, and temple management. That fact is widely supported by excavations and by the study of early cuneiform tablets. From these practical beginnings, writing slowly becomes capable of literature, myth, royal memory, lament, law, and prayer. Humanity starts by counting jars and sheep, then somehow begins counting eternity. There is something gently comic in that the road to cosmic mystery may begin with someone annoyed about missing grain. Still, the mystery deepens because the Sumerians did not treat time as empty space behind them. They filled it with descent, decree, kingship, flood, and renewal. They imagined the past as layered, not unlike the buried cities beneath their own feet. A temple rises over an older temple. A city stands over an older city. A story rests upon an older story. Beneath each beginning, another beginning waits. So tonight, you do not solve the tablets. You approach them. You let their broken order gather slowly in the mind. You feel the heat of the ancient plane, the cool clay under the scribe's palm, the soft pressure of the reed stylus. You sense a civilization looking backward and seeing not emptiness, but a vast organized shadow. Perhaps they were preserving myth. Perhaps they were shaping memory into sacred pattern. Perhaps they were trying to say that history begins only after something has been lost, and somewhere in that thought, the flood is already present, not roaring, not yet, only waiting in the distance, like dark water beyond the fields. The air grows warmer as you move toward the low country between the rivers, where the earth seems made from water, dust, and memory. You feel the ground flatten beneath your feet, stretching outward beneath a sky so wide it makes every human shelter seem temporary. The sun hangs pale above the plain. It does not rage, it simply presses down, steady and patient, like a hand resting on clay. Here, southern Mesopotamia is not a land of dramatic mountains or glittering stone cliffs. It is a place of mud, reeds, canals, date palms, and slow brown water. The great rivers wander through it with ancient confidence, changing their channels, feeding fields, drowning fields, making life possible, then reminding everyone who is actually in charge. Very charming, for a landscape that can also erase your house. You walk along a raised path beside a canal. The mud is cracked at the edges, but damp beneath the surface. Reed beds tremble in the breeze. Birds lift from the marshes with sharp cries, then vanish into brightness. Somewhere far away, a donkey brays with the weary indignation of an animal that has seen civilization and remains unimpressed. Records from early Mesopotamian settlements confirm that irrigation, agriculture, and urban life developed together across this fragile environment. Archaeologists from major university projects have shown that cities did not simply appear like miracles from the dust. They grew through labour, canal management, trade, temple organisation, and the repeated repair of things that water kept trying to ruin. It is a humbling thought. The first cities were not just inventions of ambition. They were negotiations with mud. You notice the smell first. Wet reeds, warm earth, animal dung drying for fuel, barley chaff, smoke from small hearths. The scent is not romantic exactly, unless your idea of romance involves irrigation maintenance and suspicious goats. Yet it is alive. It surrounds you with the ordinary conditions from which extraordinary records emerged. The first written signs did not begin as poetry. They began in counting, storing, measuring, and remembering who owed what. A temple household needed to know how much grain entered its storerooms. A worker needed a ration. A flock needed to be counted. A jar needed a mark. From these small necessities came a system of writing that would one day carry flood stories, royal lists, prayers, jokes, curses, and grief. You pause near a mud brick wall. Its surface is rough, sun-baked, and faintly gritty under your fingers. Each brick was shaped by hand, pressed into a mould, dried in heat, and set into place by people who probably complained about the heat as much as anyone would. Their fingerprints sometimes remain in the clay, not metaphorical fingerprints, real ones. Small grooves left by people who did not know that strangers in a distant age would care. A mainstream historical fact stands quietly here. Urban centres such as Uruk became major sites of growth during the late 4th millennium before the Common Era, with monumental buildings, administrative systems, and dense populations. Scholars connected with institutions such as the University of Chicago have helped illuminate this transformation through excavation reports, tablet studies, and careful reconstruction of city life. The result is not a fantasy city of gold. It is something more interesting. It is a working city, noisy, crowded, inventive, and tired. Imagine the sound. Sandals scuffing against packed earth, baskets creaking against shoulders, water slapping against the sides of reed boats, children laughing near courtyards, priests speaking in measured tones, scribes muttering over damp clay because someone, somewhere, has counted the sheep incorrectly. A civilization is not only made from kings and temples, it is made from irritation, repetition, and the brave human hope that tomorrow's accounting will be less disastrous. Not likely, but hopeful. The canals form the hidden veins of the land. Without them, fields dry and settlements shrink. With them, grain rises from the plain, and grain feeds workers, and workers build temples, and temples gather offerings, and offerings support scribes, and scribes preserve the memory of kings. Water becomes food, food becomes labour, labour becomes record, record becomes history. Yet every canal is also a question. Who digs it? Who owns the water? Who decides when the gate opens? Who repairs the banks when floods tear them apart? The answers shape authority. They shape hierarchy. They shape the world in which the old tablets make sense. Kingship is not merely a crown in this landscape. It is the power to command collective survival. In the distance, a temple platform rises above the plain. It is not yet the towering image later ages may imagine, but it lifts the sacred centre above houses, pens, lanes, and workshops. From far away it resembles a man-made hill, a deliberate answer to a flat world. The gods belong above, humans work below. The architecture does not need to explain the idea, it simply builds it. A quirky fringe tidbit clings to these temple platforms. Some modern speculators have imagined them as landing stages for beings from the sky, mostly because high places and ancient gods make the modern imagination start waving its arms. The evidence does not support such a claim. Still, the idea shows how powerfully Mesopotamian architecture suggests contact between levels of existence: earth and heaven, mud and height, labour and decree. The scholarly debate is more grounded and more interesting. Researchers still discuss how much early urban growth was driven by temple institutions, household economies, trade networks, environmental pressure, or competition between settlements. No single explanation feels large enough for the whole plain. The city seems to arise from many forces at once, like reeds woven into a mat. Pull one strand, and the pattern shifts. You continue through the heat, and your pace slows. The world is bright, but not empty. At ground level, everything is busy. A woman pours water into a storage jar. A man repairs a reed fence. A child presses a toe into soft mud and watches the mark fill with moisture. Dogs sleep in narrow strips of shade. A fly lands, escapes, returns, and proves that annoyance may be among humanity's oldest companions. The sky remains immense. At night it would be darker than most modern eyes can imagine. Stars would appear not as decoration, but as a ceiling of signs. In such a world, the movement of water below and the movement of lights above both seem meaningful. The land teaches pattern, flood and harvest, drought and repair, moon and month, canal and boundary, city and shrine. No wonder the scribes imagined time as ordered. Their whole survival depended on order being coaxed from instability. The fields must be measured again because water changes them. The stores must be sealed because grain disappears. The names must be written because memory is unreliable, and humans are famously talented at forgetting what benefits someone else. You kneel beside a patch of damp clay near the canal bank. It is soft enough to receive a mark. Press a reed into it, and the earth keeps the shape. Press many marks, and thought becomes visible. Let the sun harden it, and a moment becomes durable. Fire it by accident or intention, and a small administrative note may outlive empires. That is the quiet miracle of this place. Not that civilization escaped nature, but that it learned to write while surrounded by it. Not that humans conquered the rivers, because they never truly did. They bargained, adapted, complained, rebuilt, and pressed their fears into clay. The forgotten timeline begins to feel less like a strange list floating in the dark. It feels rooted in this waterlogged world of fields, shrines, and unstable ground. A people living beneath such skies, beside such rivers, could easily imagine history as something given, withdrawn, drowned, and restored. They knew the earth could remember. They also knew it could swallow. The reeds whisper as evening lowers. Smoke rises from small roofs. The canal darkens to bronze. then black. Somewhere, behind closed walls, a scribe sets a tablet aside to dry. He cannot know who will read it. He cannot know how much will break. He only knows that names must be kept, numbers must be held, and the world must not vanish without witness. A tablet lies before you, not whole, not elegant, and not interested in making things easy. Its surface is crowded with wedge-shaped signs, pressed by hands that vanished long before any modern language had begun to breathe. Some lines are clear, some are broken, some are missing entirely, which is very considerate of the ancient world, as usual. You lean closer, and the clay seems almost like a night sky turned brown. Each mark is a small constellation. Each group of marks holds a name, a city, a reign, a claim. The Sumerian King List does not speak like a story at first. It sounds more like a record keeper whispering from beneath dust. One king, then another. One city, then another. Kingship passes onward, as though authority itself is a sacred object carried from place to place. The oldest surviving copies are not from the first dawn of Sumerian writing. They are later school copies and official versions, preserved through scribal practice. Yet they look backward toward a deep and organized past. Scholars working in major collections, including the Ashmolean Museum and the British Museum, have long studied these versions to compare names, cities, and numbers. Records confirm that the list mixes rulers known from other evidence with figures wrapped in legend, making it both historical and strange. That mixture matters. It means the text is not simple fantasy, but not straightforward history either. It stands in the dim passage between memory and a meaning. You can almost feel the scribes arranging the past into a shape that would explain their present. Cities rise, cities fall, kingship moves, order survives. The list begins with a phrase that feels ceremonial, almost too calm for what it contains. Kingship descends from heaven. Then it settles in the first city. The statement is brief, but it opens a door onto an entire world view. Authority is not invented in a council meeting, not voted into being by tired farmers, and not discovered under a particularly impressive reed basket. It comes from above. It enters the world as a gift, or perhaps as a burden. The first kings named in this tradition belong to a time before the Great Flood. Their reigns are enormous. Tens of thousands of years pass beneath a single name. A modern reader may smile at that, because the numbers seem impossible, and they are impossible in ordinary human terms. Still, the scribes copied them with care. That care is the clue. The numbers were meaningful, even if they were not ordinary biography. Your finger hovers above one line, not touching the ancient surface. A king rules for thousands of years. Another rules even longer. Their cities become stations in a sacred geography. Eridu, Bad Tibira, Larak, Sippar, Shuruppak. The names feel worn and distant, like stones felt through water. They are not merely places on a map. They are steps in a remembered descent. Mainstream historical research has shown that some cities named in the King List were real urban centres in ancient Mesopotamia. Excavations and surveys have placed them within the landscape of early settlement, trade, ritual, and political growth. Universities such as Pennsylvania and Chicago have contributed greatly to the study of Mesopotamian archaeology, helping scholars separate layers of occupation from layers of literary memory. The result is not tidy. Fortunately, history almost never is. The list keeps moving. After the flood has swept over the land, kingship descends again. That second descent changes the feeling of the text. The reigns begin to shrink. The names come closer to the world recognized by historians. Dynasties appear in cities such as Kish, Uruk, and Ur. Some rulers may correspond to figures remembered in inscriptions or later traditions. The mist thins, but it does not vanish. A scholarly debate remains alive around the purpose of the King List. Some historians see it as political theology, a way of making one line of rule appear continuous and divinely approved. Others view it as a scribble exercise that organises old traditions into a single sequence. Another line of interpretation asks whether it preserves distant echoes of real power shifts among early cities. The answer may not choose one door. It may move quietly through all three. You sit with that uncertainty, and the tablet becomes more human. Imagine a scribe in a schoolroom, copying an older text while the teacher watches. The room smells of damp clay, wool, sweat, and smoke drifting from outside. A student presses signs too deeply, then smooths the surface with embarrassment. Another student whispers, gets scolded, and returns to the dignified business of preserving cosmic kingship with grubby fingers. There is something charming there. The forgotten timeline may have passed through the hands of bored students. Immense antediluvian rulers, divine descent, the memory of a flood, all copied by someone who perhaps wanted lunch. The sacred often survives because ordinary people do their assignments. A quirky fringe tidbit attaches itself to the list's long reigns. Some modern writers have treated the numbers as proof that ancient rulers were not human, or that the tablet records visitors from beyond the earth. Such claims usually leap far beyond the language of the text, yet they show how the list continues to disturb modern expectations. People sense that the scribes meant more than the simple chronology. They were building a ladder into deep time. The Sumerian way of counting helps deepen the mood. Their mathematics used a base of 60, a system whose traces remain in modern minutes and circles. When enormous reigns appear, they're often shaped by multiples and patterns that may carry symbolic weight. The numbers may be less like passport dates and more like sacred architecture. They make time feel measured, designed, and almost ritualized. You begin to hear the list as a chant, not a loud chant, but a slow recitation in a dim room. A city receives kingship, a king rules, another follows, then kingship is carried elsewhere. The repetition is calming, yet unsettling. It suggests that no city owns power forever. Even when the authority descends from heaven, it does not remain comfortably seated. It travels. That idea would have mattered in Mesopotamia, where cities competed for land, water, trade, prestige, and divine favour. A list showing kingship moving from city to city could explain political reality, while also taming it. Defeat becomes sequence. Replacement becomes destiny. The humiliation of one city becomes part of a larger order. Very convenient, perhaps, but also very powerful. The tablet does not preserve every voice. It is not the memory of farmers, potters, boatmen, or women grinding grain in courtyards, at least not directly. It is a text of kings and cities, written through late tradition. Yet even that silence teaches you something. Early history often arrives wearing a crown, while ordinary life waits in the background, carrying water and trying not to be taxed too creatively. Still, the list gives a frame through which those ordinary lives become visible. Kingship means canals, labour, storage, temples, disputes, and protection. A king's name on clay implies countless unnamed hands beneath it. The timeline of rulers is also a shadow timeline of workers. Every grand reign rests on someone cutting reeds, hauling bricks, and wondering when the day will end. The broken tablet, then, is not only a list, it is a map of ancient imagination. It tells you that the Sumerians saw history as ordered by descent, interrupted by flood, and renewed through cities. It holds real places beside legendary reigns. It makes the past feel both administrative and cosmic, which is very Mesopotamian and, frankly, rather efficient. As the light fades across the clay, the signs become harder to see. Names dissolve into texture, numbers become shadows. Yet the structure remains in your mind. Before the familiar dynasties, there was another age. Before the ordinary rulers, there were kings whose reign stretched beyond human scale. Before the remembered city, there was a deeper pattern, and the tablet, small enough to hold, carries that vastness without raising its voice. before the cities carry familiar names, your thoughts move into a dimmer country, where memory has not yet hardened into ordinary history. There are no clear streets at first, no confident maps, no dated inscriptions waiting politely for scholars to understand them. There is only the idea of a beginning, preserved by scribes who believed that order entered the human world from somewhere higher than the dust. You stand in that half-lit beginning, and the plain feels unfinished. The rivers are present, but their banks seem less certain. The marshes breathe under morning mist. Waterbirds call across shallow pools. Reeds sway together like a crowd whispering a secret it has promised not to keep very well. In the ancient tradition, kingship does not rise from human ambition alone. It descends. That single movement shapes everything. The world below receives something from the world above, and the first sacred settlements become containers for a power older than their walls. It is not politics in the modern sense. No one is printing campaign posters in the marshes, which is probably a mercy. It is a cosmic arrangement. Records from early Mesopotamian religion confirm that cities were closely bound to their patron gods, temple households, and ritual duties. Scholars at institutions such as Oxford and Yale have described how sacred authority, economic organization, and civic identity were woven together in southern Mesopotamia. A city was not simply a cluster of houses. It was a place where divine presence, human labour, stored grain, and public memory gathered into one system. You can picture the first settlement not as a shining capital, but as a fragile claim against water and heat. Low houses press close together. Walls are made of mud brick, constantly needing repair. A shrine stands slightly higher than the surrounding rooms. Smoke rises in a thin column. Someone carries a basket of fish. Someone else measures barley. A child runs barefoot through dust, and an elder complains that children have no respect for sacred thresholds. Some things may be eternal. The phrase "before the cities had names" does not mean the people living there had no identity. It means their identities are mostly lost to us. Their words have dissolved. Their songs have gone quiet. Their jokes, insults, fears, and small domestic victories have slipped beyond recovery. What remains is architecture, pottery, burials, tools, and the later scribal memory that placed divine kingship at the start of organized life. This is where the hidden timeline begins to feel less like a list and more like a ritual map. A place receives kingship. That place becomes central. Then another place receives it. The movement is not random. It suggests that civilization, in the ancient imagination, was a sequence of sacred occupations. Power arrives, resides, departs, and settles again. Perhaps that is how people explained change without letting chaos win. A mainstream historical fact rests beneath the poetry. Long before the grand dynasties known from royal inscriptions, southern Mesopotamia developed dense settlements with temples, storage systems, craft production, and long-distance exchange. Excavation and survey work have shown increasing complexity across the Ubaid and Uruk periods, as villages and towns became linked through goods, rituals, and shared styles. The forgotten timeline in the tablets does not describe those processes in modern terms. It transforms them into sacred memory. You step closer to a small shrine in the imagination. The floor is packed clay. The air smells of smoke, river mud, and dried reeds. Offerings rest in simple containers. Oil glistens faintly. A figure of a god or sacred symbol stands in dimness, receiving attention with the calm confidence of someone who never has to fetch water personally. Around this quiet centre, a community orders itself. The ordering matters. Someone must decide when fields are opened, when grain is stored, when labour is gathered, when offerings are made. In a world where drought, flood, and disease can undo months of work, authority becomes more than command. It becomes reassurance. It tells people that the world has a pattern, even when the river misbehaves. A quirky fringe tidbit appears here like a strange little lamp. Some modern enthusiasts imagine the first nameless cities as colonies from a vanished mother civilization, one older than every known culture. They point to flood myths, shared symbols, and sudden urban growth as though the entire ancient world were leaving breadcrumbs. The evidence does not require such a lost empire, but the fascination is understandable. Beginnings often look sudden when most of the evidence has been eaten by time. The scholarly debate is more careful and more patient. Researchers still discuss how ideas of kingship emerged in relation to temple authority, household leadership, warfare, trade, and environmental coordination. Was the earliest ruler primarily a war leader, a ritual servant, an economic manager, or a symbolic mediator between gods and people? The answer shifts depending on the period, the city, and the evidence. Ancient power rarely fits into one tidy box. It prefers a cluttered storeroom. You listen to the sounds of this unnamed world. A potter turns wet clay beneath his palms. A reed mat creaks. A woman pounds grain in a stone mortar, steady and rhythmic. In the distance, someone sings while repairing a canal bank. The song is gone, but the work remains imaginable. It is the kind of labour that never enters royal lists, yet makes royal lists possible. The first sacred settlements were also memory machines. Their buildings were repaired and rebuilt over generations, often on the same spots. A shrine replaced an older shrine. A platform rose over an earlier platform. Beneath each sacred floor lay another attempt to hold the divine close. Archaeologists have found such layering at early temple sites, where construction itself becomes continuity. The people may have been saying through mud brick what later scribes said through signs. The beginning must be renewed. There is a softness to that thought. A city is not born once. It is born again every time someone repairs its walls, clears its canal, lights its hearths, teaches its children, and repeats the story of why this place matters. In that sense, the descent of kingship may describe not a single event, but a continuing need. Order must keep arriving. For a moment, it feels as though you are standing before the first gate of history. But the gate is only half built. Beyond it are names not yet written, rulers not yet carved into memory, and communities still becoming themselves. The tablets will eventually give these early places titles and sequences, but the deeper reality is quieter. People are learning how to live together at scale. That is no small experiment. Frankly, it remains unfinished. The hidden timeline becomes more haunting when seen this way. It is not merely claiming that strange kings ruled in the remote past. It is imagining civilization as something bestowed, guarded, transferred, and sometimes withdrawn. It remembers cities as sacred vessels. It remembers power as movement. It remembers that human order is never guaranteed. The evening lowers over the nameless settlements. Fires appear, one by one, like small stars fallen into courtyards. The river darkens. Insects sing along the banks. A priest closes a shrine door. A worker rinses mud from his feet. Somewhere, an old person tells a child that things were arranged long ago, in a manner no one fully understands now. And in that quiet, you sense why later scribes began not with conquest, but with dissent. They were not simply asking who ruled first. They were asking how the world became ruled at all. Eridu rises in your mind at the edge of water, not as a city of shining towers, but as a patient mound in a low and shimmering land. The air is heavy with marsh scent, salt, mud, fish, and sun-warmed reeds drift together beneath a sky washed pale by heat. You feel the ground change underfoot, from dry grit to damp earth, from firm path to the uncertain softness of land that remembers being river. Here, tradition places one of the oldest sacred beginnings. Eridu is named as the first city to receive kingship in the ancient sequence, and that alone gives it a quiet gravity. It does not need to boast. It simply waits at the threshold, where myth and archaeology stand close enough to hear one another breathing. Records confirm that Eridu was a real and deeply ancient settlement in southern Mesopotamia, with temple levels reaching back into the Ubaid period. Archaeologists have uncovered a long sequence of sacred buildings there, each one resting over earlier foundations, like memory stacked in mud brick. Scholars from major research institutions have treated Eridu as crucial for understanding how ritual centres developed before the rise of large urban states. The evidence is patient, layered, and slightly stubborn, which is exactly what one hopes for in archaeology. You climb the mound slowly in imagination. The wind carries fine dust against your skin. Broken pottery crunches under your sandals. The ruins do not arrange themselves into easy pictures. Ancient sites rarely do. They make you work for every wall, every doorway, every hint of human intention. A television reconstruction may give you neat lines and golden light. The real mound gives you heat, fragments, and the feeling that time has misplaced several important pages. At the heart of Eridu stands the idea of a temple renewed across centuries. One sacred structure rises over another. Walls shift, platforms grow, floors are sealed, then covered. The shrine returns again and again to the same meaningful spot. This repetition is more than construction. It is devotion made architectural. It says that a place can become holy through return. You step inside one of those early imagined shrines. The room is small. Light enters softly. The floor smells of clay and ash. Offerings may have been placed with care. Perhaps fish, grain, oil, or small crafted objects. Outside, marsh water flashes between reeds. The sacred space is not separate from the landscape. It belongs to it. The wetland breathes around the shrine, and the shrine answers with smoke. Eridu later becomes associated with the wise water god, a divine figure linked with deep, fresh waters, craft, wisdom, and creation. In Mesopotamian thought, the watery deep beneath the earth is not simply emptiness, it is a source, hidden and powerful. That association makes Eridu feel like a city built near the mouth of a secret. Water below, sky above, mud brick between them, humanity, as usual, stuck in the middle, trying to organize a schedule. The mainstream historical fact remains steady. Eridu was not merely a literary fantasy. Excavations revealed successive temple phases, showing that the site carried ritual importance over a very long span. This matters because the ancient tradition naming Eridu as the first seat of kingship is not floating free from geography. It attaches the beginning of order to a place that archaeology also recognizes as exceptionally old and sacred, yet scholarship still moves carefully. A current debate among historians and archaeologists asks how much later texts preserve real memories of early religious centres, and how much they reshape the past to serve later theology and politics. Eridu may have been ancient enough to inspire reverence, but reverence often edits memory. It polishes some details, forgets others, and adds a little sacred lighting for effect. You look out over the ancient wetlands. The horizon trembles, water channels glitter, boats made from reeds or wood move slowly through marsh passages. Fishermen return with nets darkened by river life. Birds cry overhead. Cattle stand in the shallows, patient and heavy. The city does not dominate the land. It rests within a living maze of water and silt. This environment helps explain Eridu's power. In a land where survival depends on water, a sacred centre linked to the deep becomes more than symbolic. It becomes comforting. It tells people that beneath instability there is a hidden reservoir of order. The rivers may wander, floods may break banks, fields may fail, but somewhere below, sacred water remains. A quirky fringe tidbit often attaches itself to Eridu's reputation as the first city. Some modern writers have imagined it as the memory of a far older settlement, perhaps even a remnant of a lost civilization swallowed by rising waters. That idea wanders well beyond firm evidence. but it has a certain dreamlike appeal. When a place is called first, people naturally wonder what came before first. Human curiosity is wonderfully disobedient that way. Still, Eridu's real strangeness does not require an invented empire. The actual layers are strange enough. Temple upon temple, ritual continuity across generations, a city remembered as first by later scribes, a sacred landscape where fresh water, marsh, and creation imagery gather together. Sometimes the truth is quieter than speculation, but much deeper. You imagine a builder carrying wet bricks up a slope. His hands are cracked, his back aches. He may not know that his labour adds one more layer to a site that will become legendary. To him, the task is immediate. Lift, place, smooth, repeat. Perhaps he hears a priest chanting nearby. Perhaps he hears only flies. Either way, the mound grows. That is how ancient holiness often forms. Not in one overwhelming moment, but through repetition so long that repetition becomes mystery. A lamp is lit, a floor is swept, a wall is repaired, a story is told, a child grows old, then another child hears the same name. Eridu, the beginning, the first seat, the old place by the waters. For a moment, the sun lowers and the mound turns bronze. Shadows collect in the hollows. The marsh cools. The smell of reeds becomes sharper. You hear water lapping against a bank, small and regular, like a sleeping creature breathing. The sacred platform stands above the damp plain, not high enough to escape the world, only high enough to declare that meaning has been placed here. This is the quiet force of Eridu within the forgotten timeline. It gives the pre-flood age a location that can be walked, excavated, argued over, and touched. It anchors the vast claim of descending kingship in mud, brick and silt. It lets the ancient imagination say that before ordinary history became crowded with dynasties, battles and city pride, there was a first centre where order touched earth. You do not need to decide whether every line of tradition is literal. The site asks for a slower kind of attention. It asks you to notice how memory gathers around old places. It asks you to feel how a real mound can become a sacred beginning. It asks you to understand that for the people who preserved the tale, Eridu was not simply old. It was original. Night settles across the marsh. The last birds fold into the reeds. A small fire burns near a doorway. Somewhere in the dark, water moves through channels no one can fully control. Above it all, the first city of the old memory seems to rest at the edge of the world, listening to the deep. The long rains begin quietly, almost politely, as if they are not about to disturb every ordinary idea of time. A name appears, then a number follows it, vast enough to make the mind slow down. Thousands of years gather beneath a single ruler. Another name comes, and the number grows again. The tablet does not pause to explain itself. It simply sets the impossible beside the official and lets you sit with the discomfort. You look at those rain lengths and feel modern reason waking up, adjusting its spectacles and preparing to object. Fair enough. Human bodies do not rule for 20,000 years. Even the most persistent administrator eventually becomes dust. Yet the ancient scribes did not seem embarrassed by these figures. They copied them, preserved them, and placed them inside a sequence that clearly mattered. This is where the forgotten timeline stretches beyond biography. The numbers are not merely long, they're almost ceremonial. They make the pre-flood world feel larger, slower, and less human than the world of later kings. Time itself seems heavier there. A reign is not a career, it is an age. Records confirm that Mesopotamian scribes used a mathematical system based on 60, and that large numbers could carry both practical and symbolic meaning. Scholars from universities such as Yale, Oxford and Pennsylvania have studied how numerical patterns appear in administrative, astronomical, and literary texts. The old scribes were not vague dreamers who could not count. They were expert counters. That makes the great reigns more intriguing, not less. You imagine a schoolroom in the ancient city. Clay tablets are stacked near the wall. A teacher recites names while students press signs into damp surfaces. The air smells of clay, oil, wool, and impatience. A boy gets one number wrong, and the teacher sighs with the ancient exhaustion of educators everywhere. Even cosmic history, apparently, requires neat handwriting. The numbers attached to the earliest kings often appear in units that reflect Sumerian counting habits. Some reigns are given in tens of thousands of years, shaped by multiples that seem too patterned to be accidental. This has led many scholars to ask whether the figures express sacred magnitude rather than literal duration. In other words, the tablet may not be telling you that one man occupied a throne through geological absurdity. It may be telling you that the First Age belonged to a different scale of reality. That's a subtler mystery. It's also harder to dismiss. A mainstream historical fact gives you a firm place to stand. The Sumerian King List includes rulers whose historical status varies widely. Some later kings are known from inscriptions and archaeological context, while the earliest antediluvian names belong to a mythic horizon. This blending shows that ancient scribes were not drawing the same sharp line modern historians draw between legend and record. Their past was layered, and each layer had its own kind of truth. Your mind settles on the first rulers of the pre-flood sequence. They are not presented with rich personal stories in the list itself. They do not boast, cry, scheme, or ask for better palace furniture. They are names joined to cities and reigns. That sparseness gives them power. They become shapes in the distance, standing at the edge of a world before ordinary memory. The silence around them invites interpretation. Were they imagined as divine, semi-divine, ancestral, symbolic, or simply ancient beyond measure? The text does not answer in the way a modern reader might prefer. It lets the names remain still. Their vast reigns do the speaking. A quirky fringe tidbit appears here, as it often does when numbers become enormous. Some modern writers claim that the long reigns prove the kings were not human at all. Perhaps beings with different lifespans, or rulers who came from the sky. The tablets themselves do not require that reading. Still, the speculation reveals a real unease. When ancient texts make time too large for human bodies, modern imagination starts building unusual explanations. The more cautious debate is no less fascinating. Some scholars see the enormous reigns as part of a literary strategy that separates mythic time from historical time. Others suggest that they express political prestige, making early cities appear unimaginably ancient. A further view considers whether the numbers encode scribal traditions of cosmic order, mathematics, and sacred proportion. The debate remains open because the evidence is broken, copied, and shaped by centuries of transmission. You feel the texture of that uncertainty. It is not empty. It is filled with possibilities. The long reigns also change the emotional weather of the story. They make the pre-flood world feel slow, almost dreamlike. Cities do not merely rise and fall across centuries. They endure across spans that dwarf dynasties. A king begins to rule, and generations vanish like breath on a cold morning. Fields are planted, harvested, abandoned, and planted again. Temples are repaired until their oldest bricks become hidden beneath newer floors. If taken symbolically, the numbers may be saying that the First Order was vast, stable, and remote. If taken ritually, they may be placing the first kings closer to divine time than human time. If taken politically, they may be giving prestige to cities by stretching their authority backward into sacred antiquity. None of these meanings cancels the others. Ancient texts are very good at carrying several burdens at once. You hear the list almost like a drumbeat. A city receives rule, a king reigns, the number spreads outward, another king follows. The sequence is repetitive, but not dull. It has the calming weight of a litany. Yet beneath the calm is something unsettling. The longer the reigns become, the less familiar the world feels. You're not among ordinary monarchs now. You are in the deep chamber of cultural memory. There is a philosophical sadness in these immense durations. A reign of thousands of years sounds powerful, but it also makes individual life disappear. What is one farmer's grief inside 28,000 years? What is one child's laughter? What is one broken jar? One wedding song? One night of fever? The list does not say. It compresses everything beneath the name of a ruler. History often does that, rather rudely, and yet, perhaps the long numbers protect something. They preserve the feeling that there was a time before the present pattern of human life, a time whose scale cannot be reached by normal memory. The figures do not bring that world close. They push it away. They place it behind a veil of magnitude. You sit with the tablet while evening cools the room. The clay is small. The time inside it is enormous. This contrast feels almost impossible. A human hand can hold the object, but no human mind can comfortably hold the durations it claims. The tablet becomes a little doorway, and through it you glimpse an age where time moves like a dark river under the earth. Perhaps the scribes knew exactly what they were doing. By making the first king's reign beyond human measure, they mark the pre-flood world as fundamentally different. It was not merely earlier, it was other. It belonged to a time when kingship was fresh from heaven, when cities were sacred vessels, and when history had not yet narrowed into ordinary human scale. The long reigns do not need to be solved tonight. They only need to be felt. Let them stretch the room around you. Let them make the old world wider, slower, stranger. Somewhere in the clay, a number waits beside a name, and the name waits beside a city, and the city waits beneath the shadow of water. 7 cities begin to gather in the dark, not as bright marks on a modern map, but as sacred stations across a plain of water, reeds, fields, and dust. Their names seem to rise one by one from the clay, each carrying a portion of the old authority. Eridu, Bad Tibira, Larak, Sippar, Shuruppak. In some traditions, the sequence appears with slight differences, because ancient memory enjoys making scholars earn their sleep. You feel the pattern before you fully understand it. Kingship does not remain fixed. It travels. It enters one place, fills it with meaning, then moves onward to another. The result is not a single capital ruling forever, but a chain of chosen centres. Each city becomes a vessel. Each vessel holds order for a time. Then the sacred weight passes away. The landscape beneath these names is not empty. Southern Mesopotamia is a living web of waterways, settlements, fields, and ritual centres. Records confirm that early cities in this region were connected by trade, shared religious traditions, conflict, and administrative practices. Scholars from institutions such as the University of Chicago and the University of Pennsylvania have shown through excavation and survey that power in ancient Mesopotamia often shifted among city-states rather than resting in one permanent centre. That shifting world gives the old sequence its quiet plausibility. Even when the pre-flood reigns move beyond ordinary history, the idea of authority passing from city to city feels deeply Mesopotamian. A ruler may claim greatness, a temple may gather wealth, a city may dominate its neighbours. Yet the river changes course, alliances fail, fields grow salty, and another place rises with fresh confidence. Very rude of reality, but consistent. You stand first at Eridu, where the marsh air lies heavy and sacred water seems to breathe beneath the earth. The city feels like a beginning because it is low, ancient, and close to the deep. Then the path moves toward Bad Tibira, remembered as a place of metal workers and divine associations. Its name later invited interpretations linked to craft, brightness, and transformation. You can imagine furnaces glowing at dusk, copper scent in the air, and sparks lifting like tiny stars that got a bit too ambitious. At Larak the picture grows dimmer. The city is more elusive, less firmly grasped by archaeology and memory. That uncertainty gives it a special softness, Some cities survive as ruins you can walk, others survive as names that hover. Larak belongs to that half-hidden category, where the ancient list preserves a place that modern certainty cannot easily hold. Then comes Sippar, linked in later Mesopotamian tradition with the sun god and with sacred knowledge. Its presence in the sequence gives the old geography a different kind of light. You imagine dawn over flat roofs, bronze-coloured water, and a disk of sunlight rising through dust. In such a place, memory itself feels watched. Nothing truly hides from the sun, except, of course, most of ancient history. Shuruppak stands nearest to the flood story. It is remembered as the city of the survivor in Mesopotamian tradition, a place where warning enters the human world. Archaeological work at the site has revealed real occupation and flood deposits from ancient river events. Though connecting any single layer to literary tradition remains deeply debated, the city feels like a threshold, not because certainty has arrived, but because the story grows heavier there. A mainstream historical fact helps anchor this sequence. Ancient Mesopotamia was not one continuous kingdom during its earliest urban centuries. It was a region of competing and cooperating city-states, each with its own gods, institutions, and claims to prestige. Research associated with universities such as Yale and Stanford has emphasized how political identity in Mesopotamia often formed around the city, its temple, and its divine patron. This matters because the pre-flood city sequence is not merely decorative. It reflects a way of imagining civilization through centers of sacred rule. Authority belongs somewhere. It has a house, a shrine, a name, a storage system, a festival calendar, and probably several officials who are extremely pleased with themselves. When kingship moves, the world is reorganized. The 7 cities, or the remembered group of sacred centers, create a rhythm. First, order descends, then it settles, then it transfers. This rhythm feels like breathing. Inhale, a city receives power. Exhale, power departs. The pattern continues until the waters interrupt everything. The old timeline becomes a procession across the plain, a slow journey from first settlement to final warning. A quirky fringe tidbit follows these cities like a shadow with too much confidence. Some modern alternative writers arrange the pre-flood centers as if they formed a hidden technological network, a kind of ancient grid built for purposes no ordinary historian has noticed. The evidence does not support that reading, yet the idea feeds on something real in the texts. The cities are not isolated, they form a system. The ancient scribes wanted you to see order in their sequence. The scholarly debate turns on what kind of order it is. Some specialists consider the city list a theological geography, where important cult centers are arranged to express divine history. Others see a political memory shaped by later scribes who wish to harmonize local traditions. Another interpretation suggests that the sequence preserves traces of regional importance, now partly lost to archaeology. Each view has weight. None closes the door completely. You walk between these cities in imagination, though the real distances are long and the paths uncertain. Heat shimmers above the plain. A canal reflects the white glare of noon. Date palms rattle in a dry wind. At dusk, the land cools quickly, and the smell of mud becomes stronger. Traders move with goods. Priests travel for rituals. Messengers carry orders sealed in clay. Travellers bring rumours, which have always moved faster than wisdom. Each city has its own sound. Eridu murmurs with marsh water. Bad Tibra rings with imagined craft. Larak remains quiet, almost withheld. Sippar glows with dawn hymns and scribal associations. Shuruppak listens under a darkening sky. Together they form not a road, but a memory chain. One name pulls the next into place. You begin to understand why the ancient scribes may have arranged the pre-flood world this way. A single first city would be powerful, but a sequence is stronger. It gives the past motion. It lets civilization unfold in stages. It suggests that no place holds the whole truth alone. The first age is distributed, carried across settlements like a lamp passed from hand to hand. There is something comforting in that, and something unsettling. If kingship can descend, it can also depart. If a city can be chosen, it can be abandoned. If order can move, then every wall is temporary. The ancient plain knew this well. Rivers shifted, fields soured, floods came without asking permission, which is poor civic behaviour by any standard. The 7 cities become a lesson in fragility. They are remembered not because they conquered forever, but because they belong to a cycle. Their glory is tied to movement and loss. Their names survive in a tablet tradition that already knows they stand beneath the sign of coming water. Night gathers over the plain, fires appear along canal. In one city, a priest closes a temple door. In another, a scribe dries a tablet. Elsewhere, a boatman ties his vessel to a reed post and listens to insects tremble in the dark. The cities do not know they are becoming part of a forgotten timeline. They simply live, work, worship, and wait. And above them, in the ancient imagination, kingship continues its slow passage, touching each place with borrowed light. The gods behind the timeline do not enter like thunder. They arrive more quietly, as presences already assumed by the world. In the old Mesopotamian imagination, a city is never only human. It has a divine owner, a sacred household, a personality larger than its walls. The temple is not decoration. It is the centre around which fields, labour, offerings, and memory turn. You step into that understanding slowly. The plain is dark blue before dawn. A temple platform rises above the clustered roofs. Lamps burn near doorways. Somewhere inside the sacred precinct, attendants prepare offerings while the air carries the scent of oil, grain, incense, and washed stone. No one treats the god as an idea. The god has a house. The god has servants. The god receives food. The god, apparently, has better accommodation than almost everyone else. This is not a small detail. It is the key to the ancient structure. Kingship descends from heaven because heaven is not distant in the way a modern mind often imagines. Heaven presses into the city through ritual, image, name, and office. The ruler does not simply govern people. He stands within a sacred arrangement where divine will, temple wealth, and civic survival are bound together. Records confirm that major Mesopotamian cities were associated with particular patron deities, such as the water-wise lord of Eridu, the sky god linked with ancient authority, the storm and air god honoured at Nippur, and the sun god revered at Sippar. Scholars at Oxford, Yale, and the Oriental Institute have long emphasized that religion in Mesopotamia shaped law, kingship, labour, and urban identity. It was not a private corner of the life. It was the ceiling. You feel that ceiling overhead as the first light reaches the temple walls. The bricks warm gradually. A priest moves through a courtyard carrying a vessel. The sound of his steps is soft, almost swallowed by the space. Offerings are not symbolic in a thin sense. They maintain relationship. Bread, beer, dates, animals, cloth, and precious objects move toward the divine house because the world must remain balanced. The gods in these traditions are powerful, but not always gentle. They deliberate, argue, desire, create, punish, regret, and sometimes behave with a level of emotional steadiness that would concern any reasonable village council. This gives Mesopotamian myth its human texture. Divine beings are not distant abstractions shining beyond all conflict. They are personalities inside a cosmic administration. A mainstream historical fact gives shape to this. Cuneiform texts from Mesopotamia preserve hymns, myths, temple records, royal inscriptions, and rituals that present the gods as active forces in political and natural order. University research on these texts shows that kings often justified rule by claiming divine selection, divine favour or sacred duty. The ruler's legitimacy depended on more than strength. It needed a place in the divine pattern. That pattern explains why the Forgotten Timeline is not merely a chronology of rulers. It is a map of custody. Kingship belongs to the gods first. Cities receive it under divine permission. Human kings hold it only for a time. Such an arrangement makes power feel sacred, but also precarious. A king can be chosen, but choice can be withdrawn. A city can shine, then be left in darkness. You sit beside a temple wall and listen. The morning grows louder. Workers arrive. Animals protest. A porter drops something and mutters in a tone that transcends millennia. Somewhere, a scribe records deliveries. The divine household requires an earthly bureaucracy, which is a wonderfully Mesopotamian problem. Even gods, it seems, need accountants. The central divine figures differ across cities and stories, yet several roles matter to the old memory. There are gods of creation, wisdom, sky, air, water, justice, fertility, and war. There are divine assemblies where decisions are imagined as collective decrees. This is important. The flood traditions do not usually present catastrophe as random weather. They place it within divine deliberation, however troubling that deliberation may be. A quirky fringe tidbit appears whenever people read these divine assemblies through modern suspicion. Some claim the gods were misunderstood rulers from another world, and the temples were administrative stations for non-human overseers. This interpretation is far more modern than the tablets themselves. Still, it reflects the same unease felt by many readers. The gods in Mesopotamian texts are organized, named, ranked, and involved in practical affairs. To a modern imagination, that can feel strangely bureaucratic, the scholarly debate is richer and more careful. Specialists continue to ask how Mesopotamian divine narratives reflect temple institutions, political hierarchies, environmental anxiety, and inherited mythic traditions. Are the gods in these stories projections of city power? Are they theological attempts to explain suffering? Are they poetic ways of describing forces larger than human control? Each question opens another room. None ends the building. You turn toward the idea of divine assembly. It is a striking image. The fate of humans, cities, and even the earth itself may be discussed among gods like matters brought before a court. There are decrees, there are decisions, there are secrets. This gives the timeline a legal atmosphere, as if history is not merely happening but being authorized. In that world, a flood is not only water, it is a verdict. A city's rise is not only growth, it is appointment. A king's reign is not only administration, it is stewardship under powers who are believed to see farther than humans, though not always more kindly. That tension creates the strange emotional depth of Mesopotamian myth. The gods maintain order, yet humans may suffer under that order. You may find yourself wondering what ordinary people felt about such divine powers. Fear, gratitude, resignation, hope, perhaps all at once. A farmer who brought offerings might not think in grand theology. He might want rain at the right time, children to survive, fields to yield, debts to soften, sickness to pass, and officials to become briefly reasonable. The divine world mattered because life was vulnerable. Temples offered connection to that higher order. Their rituals gave shape to uncertainty. Their calendars marked time. Their festivals renewed bonds between city and god. In the Forgotten Timeline, divine authority sits behind every transfer of kingship because the ancient city cannot imagine itself alone. It exists under watch. For a moment, the temple courtyard grows still. Sunlight reaches the threshold. Dust floats in the beam like tiny particles of vanished offerings. A statue or sacred emblem rests within shadow, hidden from common sight. The unseen has weight here. It organizes movement. It determines who enters, who waits, who speaks, who bows, who records. Perhaps that is why the old tablets remain so compelling. They do not present history as a chain of human accidents. They present it as a structure, built from divine descent, chosen cities, appointed rulers, and catastrophic interruption. Whether a modern reader believes the theology is not the point. The point is that the Sumerians understood time as inhabited. There is no empty past in this vision. There are gods behind it, councils above it, waters beneath it, and clay preserving its outline. Humanity stands inside the arrangement, useful, noisy, fragile, and often confused. A little like now, only with more barley. The lamps fade as daylight strengthens. The city wakes fully. The god's house remains at the centre, calm and demanding. Around it, people begin another day of labour beneath powers they cannot see but constantly serve. The forgotten timeline continues to turn on that invisible axis. Humanity enters the old stories not with a crown, but with a basket. That is worth noticing. In the Mesopotamian imagination, people are not first presented as glorious masters of the earth, standing proudly above creation while the sun admires their cheekbones. They appear as workers, shaped into a world already heavy with tasks. The canals must be dug, the fields must be watered, the temples must be fed. The gods, it seems, have organised a universe with a very serious maintenance problem. You stand beside a canal before sunrise. The mud is cold beneath bare feet. A line of workers moves through the grey light, carrying tools, baskets, and the sleepy resentment known to labourers everywhere. The reeds are wet. The air smells of silt and smoke. A heron lifts from the shallows, offended by human activity before breakfast. The water waits in its channel, passive for now, though everyone knows it has opinions. In several Mesopotamian creation traditions, humans are fashioned so that divine beings may be relieved of exhausting labour. This idea appears most clearly in later Akkadian compositions, especially in stories where lesser gods complain about the burden of work. Scholars at Yale, Oxford, and the University of Chicago have studied these texts as reflections of ancient labour systems, temple economies, and theological attempts to explain why human life is marked by toil. The fact is simple and slightly uncomfortable. In these myths, work is not an accident. Work is the reason people are made. That does not mean the stories are crude. They are not saying humans are worthless. They are saying humans are necessary. A servant can be vulnerable and essential at the same time. A worker may stand low in the hierarchy, yet without that worker, the whole system fails. The ancient world understood this very well, though it still preferred that someone else do the lifting. You feel the weight of a reed basket against your shoulder. It scratches the skin. Mud fills it quickly, heavier than expected because mud enjoys betraying optimism. You carry it up the canal bank and dump it where the overseer points. Then you go back, again. The rhythm becomes the day, lift, walk, empty, return. The body becomes part of irrigation. This is not glamorous labour, but it is civilization. Without canals, fields dry. Without fields, grain fails. Without grain, temple households shrink. Without temple offerings, the sacred relationship trembles. Without scribes recording rations, someone complains, someone cheats, someone starves, and someone writes a very annoyed tablet. The divine system rests upon ordinary backs. A mainstream historical fact stands here with quiet force. Ancient Mesopotamian temples and palaces organised large numbers of workers through ration systems, recorded in clay tablets that list grain, beer, oil, wool, and labour assignments. University research into administrative archives has shown how deeply writing, economy, and labour were connected. The earliest tablets often concern not legends, but practical management. Humanity wrote itself into history while keeping track of food and work. This makes the mythic idea of humans created for labour feel less abstract. The people telling and copying these stories lived inside institutions where labour was counted, assigned, and justified. They saw workers moving through temple estates. They saw canals cleared and bricks carried. They saw the human body as part of a sacred and economic machine. The myths gave cosmic language to a social reality. A scholarly debate remains open around how directly these creation stories reflect actual labour conditions. Some specialists interpret them as theological explanations for human suffering and obligation. Others read them as elite texts that naturalise social hierarchy. Another view sees them as meditations on dependence, where gods and humans both require one another to sustain the world. The debate matters because the stories are not neutral. They tell people why their lives feel as they do. You move from the canal toward the temple precinct. Dawn spreads gold along the mud brick walls. Women grind grain in courtyards, their stones rasping in steady circles. Men lead animals toward pens. Children carry small bundles and pretend not to be watched. A scribe sits near a doorway, tablet on his knee, stylus ready. He writes numbers with a calmness that may conceal absolute power. Never underestimate the person holding the records. The temple does not merely receive offerings. It consumes labour. Its ovens need fuel. Its storerooms need grain. Its workshops need wool, metal, reeds, and skilled hands. Its rituals need specialists. Its gods need food placed before them daily, then redistributed in ways governed by custom and hierarchy. The whole arrangement is sacred, economic, and practical at once. The old myths make more sense in such a world. Humans serve the gods, but service is not limited to prayer. Service includes digging, brewing, baking, weaving, herding, building, and carrying. Worship may smell like incense in one room, and like sweat in another. The divine order is maintained by bodies. A quirky fringe tidbit often wanders into this subject wearing dramatic sandals. Some modern theorists claim that ancient texts describe humans as a genetically designed workforce for powerful beings. This claim is not supported by the actual philology, and it usually imports modern ideas into ancient language. Yet it has become popular because the myths really do describe humanity as created for labour. The mistake is turning sacred metaphor and ancient social imagination into modern machinery. Still, the unease is real. If humans are made to work, what does that say about freedom? If the earlier stories explain labour as divine purpose, are they comforting the weary or controlling them? The answer may be both. Ancient myths often console and command at the same time. They wrap difficult realities in sacred cloth. You pause beside a worker receiving rations. Measure of barley, perhaps beer, perhaps oil. The amount is recorded. The worker's name may be written, or perhaps only a category, age, gender, or status. Behind that small transaction lies an entire world of dependence. Food flows through institutions. Labour flows back. The system survives because everyone participates, willingly or otherwise. In the forgotten timeline, humanity's role is therefore not heroic in the obvious sense. Humans do not stride into the pre-flood world as conquerors of nature. They're inserted into an existing order, and that order expects service. They keep the canals open, they feed the temples, they multiply across the land, they become useful. They're numerous, then, in some traditions, troubling. That progression is quiet, but important. Need creates people. People create noise, demand, conflict, and memory. The solution becomes a problem. The workers meant to ease divine burden become a presence that cannot be ignored. This is one of the darker ironies in Mesopotamian myth. Humanity is made because labour is necessary, but human life expands beyond the task assigned to it. You can feel the tension at noon, when the sun stands high and the canal bank blazes white. Workers rest in narrow shade. Someone drinks from a jar. Someone laughs at a joke that history mercifully does not preserve. A child watches ants struggle with a crumb. The world is not only hardship, it is also talk, hunger, humour, boredom, affection, and stubborn survival. Perhaps that is the hidden tenderness beneath the labour myth. Even if humans are created as servants, They become more than service. They remember, they grieve, they sing, they complain with impressive creativity. They press signs into clay and accidentally outlive the kings who commanded them. The basket lowers from your shoulder, the mud remains. The canal still needs repair. In the distance, the temple platform glows in the heat, serene and demanding. Humanity stands between earth and heaven, carrying the weight of both. When noise reaches heaven, it does not sound like one shout. It sounds like life itself becoming too much. Mortars pound grain before dawn. Infants cry in courtyards. Dogs bark at strangers. Workers call across canals. Beer jars clink. Doors creak. Arguments rise over water rights. Missing tools. Late rations. Careless goats. And the eternal mystery of who moved the basket. You stand in the city as evening gathers, and the sound thickens around you. It is not wicked sound at first. It is ordinary human sound. People are alive. They are hungry, tired, hopeful, jealous, affectionate, and dramatic about very small things. Civilization creates music, prayer, law, and poetry. It also creates neighbours, the gods. According to one ancient tradition, begin to notice, in the Atrahasis tradition, preserved in later Mesopotamian copies, humanity multiplies until its noise disturbs the divine world. This is one of the most unsettling ideas in ancient literature, not because it is loud, but because it is so strangely domestic. The problem is not rebellion in battle. The problem is overcrowded life. Scholars at major universities have studied this myth as a meditation on population, labour, divine anxiety, and the uneasy balance between creation and control. You listen more carefully. The city's sound rises in layers. A mother soothes a restless child. A man curses a broken yoke. A priest chants in a temple court. Someone laughs too hard at something not quite funny enough. A merchant insists his weights are honest, which is always reassuring and therefore suspicious. The city breathes noise into the dusk. The old myth turns that noise into a cosmic complaint. The gods who once needed human labour become troubled by human abundance. People were useful when they carried the burden of work, yet usefulness becomes presence, and presence becomes pressure. The world fills with human movement. The divine order begins to feel crowded by its own solution. A mainstream historical fact rests beneath this strange mythic image. Mesopotamian cities could become dense, noisy, and highly organised places, with households, workshops, streets, temples, animals, markets, and administrative centres pressed closely together. Archaeological research from institutions such as the University of Pennsylvania and the University of Chicago has shown how early urban life transformed sound, labour, disease, waste, and social tension. The myth of noise may not be a literal report, but it understands something real about cities. Cities are loud because they compress need. Everyone wants water. Everyone wants food. Everyone wants space. Everyone wants protection from everyone else wanting those same things. Urban life is cooperation with a headache. Ancient Mesopotamia knew this long before modern apartment buildings began contributing their own tragic percussion. In the myth, the divine response unfolds in stages. The gods do not immediately send the great flood. First come lesser disasters, attempts to reduce humanity without ending the world entirely. There are afflictions, shortages, and pressures. The pattern is chilling because it feels administrative. The problem is identified. A measure is taken. The result is judged insufficient. Another measure follows. Catastrophe arrives not as madness, but as policy. That calmness is what makes the story so disturbing. A thunderous rage would be easier to understand. Instead, the myth imagines divine decision-making as a series of deliberations. Humanity becomes a population to be managed. Noise becomes evidence. Suffering becomes a tool. The flood waits at the end of this logic like a sealed order in a dark room. A scholarly debate continues around how to interpret the noise in this tradition. Some specialists view it as a metaphor for overpopulation and environmental strain. Others see it as social disturbance, the unruly sound of human independence. Another interpretation treats noise as ritual imbalance, a sign that creation has exceeded its proper measure. The phrase remains powerful because it refuses to settle into one meaning. You walk through the city at night. Oil lamps tremble in doorways, the scent of lentils, smoke, damp wool, and animal pens clings to the lanes. A baby cries behind a wall, then quiets. A flute plays somewhere, soft and wandering. Two men argue in low voices near a courtyard, trying not to wake someone and failing with admirable dedication. The gods hear everything, or so the story imagines. There is a strange sympathy in the divine complaint, though it is not comfortable sympathy. Anyone who has tried to sleep beside a busy street, a barking dog, or an ambitious rooster may understand the first flicker of irritation. The myth expands that irritation into cosmic dread. What if human life in its sheer abundance becomes unbearable to the powers that made it? That question is not only ancient, it is also painfully human. Parents long for children, then long for quiet. Cities promise opportunity, then produce exhaustion. Leaders desire subjects, then fear crowds. Temples need workers, then worry about unrest. Creation always has consequences. The old scribes knew this, and they gave the consequences a sound. A quirky fringe tidbit appears here in a different form. Some modern readers suggest that the noise was not literal sound, but a coded memory of human technology disturbing powerful beings. They imagine machines, mines, or lost engines roaring across the pre-flood world. There is no solid textual evidence for that. Yet the idea persists because the myth's complaint feels oddly modern. Humanity grows, spreads, builds, and becomes impossible to ignore. The older reading is quieter and more devastating. Humans are not destroyed because they are monsters. They are threatened because they are many. They fill the world with need. They disturb the stillness. Their ordinary life becomes a problem for the divine order. That is more unsettling than a tale of pure evil, because ordinary life is exactly what you hear around you. The city continues breathing through the night. A pot cools beside a hearth. Someone snores. A donkey shifts its weight with deep philosophical disappointment. In a temple storehouse, sealed jars sit in rows. In a scribe's room, a tablet dries. The sound of the city never fully stops. It only lowers, like a tide. Perhaps the ancient story preserves the anxiety of living in a world where growth cannot continue without consequence. More people require more grain. More grain requires more water. More water requires more canals. More canals require more labour. More labour requires more management. More management creates more resentment. The system expands until even the gods in the story seem tired of its success. This is the hidden turn in humanity's role. Created to relieve divine labour, people become a force of their own, not independent enough to escape the gods, but numerous enough to trouble them. The worker becomes a crowd. The crowd becomes a murmur. The murmur becomes noise. The noise rises. You stand beneath the night sky, and the city's sounds drift upward through blue darkness. It is easy to imagine heaven listening, not with kindness, not with hatred either. Perhaps with weariness, perhaps with fear, perhaps with the cold attention of powers deciding that something must be done. No rain falls yet. The canals remain calm. The stars hold their places. But the atmosphere of the story has changed. The world has become too full, and the old order has begun to consider silence. The tablet of Atrahasis does not open like a shout from a ruined sky. It opens with labour, complaint, and the uneasy feeling that creation has become tired of itself. You sit beside the clay as though beside a sleeping animal, careful not to wake it too suddenly. The signs are old, copied from older sources, preserved through fragments that scholars patiently join like pieces of a broken knight. Atrahasis is not the name of a king seeking glory. It means the very wise one, as later readers often understand it, and the title suits him well. He survives not through strength, not through conquest, not through dramatic speeches delivered to an impressed crowd. He survives because he listens. In ancient literature, that may be the rarest heroism of all. Records confirm that the Atrahasis epic was preserved in Akkadian on clay tablets, with major copies dating to the 2nd millennium before the Common Era. Scholars at institutions such as Yale, Oxford, and the British Museum have studied its flood narrative as one of the most important ancient Near Eastern accounts of creation, labour, divine conflict, and human survival. It is not simply a flood story. It is a story about why the flood became thinkable. You enter the myth through a dim chamber of divine unrest. The lesser gods are burdened with work, digging canals and maintaining the earth. They complain against the heavier gods, and their protest leads to a dangerous solution. Humans are made to carry the work instead. Clay, divine substance, and ritual action combine in a creation that feels both sacred and practical. Humanity is born into obligation. There is a chill in that beginning. People do not arrive as decorative additions to a finished world. They arrive as the answer to a labour dispute. It is almost funny, if one has a very dry sense of humour and perhaps a safe distance from temple administration. Yet the myth is serious. It presents human life as necessary, noisy, and deeply entangled with divine need. As generations pass in the story, humanity increases, the sound of people rises, the gods cannot rest. Measures are sent against the human population, but each measure fails to solve the deeper problem. The earth remains too full of human presence. At last, the divine council moves toward a final decision. The flood is planned in secrecy. You can feel the mood tighten. This is not only a disaster tale, it is a story about hidden knowledge. Most humans do not know what is coming. They continue cooking, trading, sleeping, arguing, loving, and repairing their ordinary lives. Above them, in the unseen order, a decision has already been made. That gap between daily life and cosmic decree is quietly terrifying. A mainstream historical fact grounds the fear. Ancient Mesopotamia was repeatedly shaped by flood events, shifting river channels, and water management crises. Archaeologists and environmental historians from major universities have shown that riverine landscapes could bring fertility and destruction in the same breath. The Atrahasis epic transforms that environmental reality into sacred narrative, where water becomes not only weather, but judgment. Inside the story, one god cannot accept the total destruction in silence. The wise divine figure connected with deep waters and clever counsel warns Atrahasis indirectly, speaking through a wall or reed structure so that a divine oath is not plainly broken. The image is remarkable. A secret passes through architecture. A house hears what a man must understand. Walls, apparently, can be better informed than people. This remains true in many offices. The warning does not arrive as a public announcement. There is no open assembly in the marketplace, no royal proclamation, no cheerful notice posted near the canal. The message comes privately, mysteriously, in language that must be interpreted. Atrahasis must abandon his house, build a vessel, and preserve life. The command is simple in shape, but immense in consequence. You imagine him at night, listening beside a reed wall. Outside, the city breathes with ordinary darkness. A dog barks, a jar cools. Somewhere, a woman sings softly to a child. Inside, the message changes everything. The familiar world becomes temporary. The house that protected him becomes something he must leave. The land beneath his feet becomes a place already sentenced. A scholarly debate remains open around the relationship between Atrahasis and later flood traditions. Some specialists argue that the epic preserves older Mesopotamian themes that influenced other ancient narratives. Others emphasize the independent shaping of each text within its own religious and literary world. Another view studies the myth as a reflection of population anxiety and ecological stress. The debate continues because the story is both literary and deeply rooted in lived realities. A quirky fringe tidbit clings to Atrahasis as well. Some modern writers claim the warning through the wall hides evidence of advanced communication technology, as if the ancient house were receiving a secret transmission. The actual text does not require such machinery. Its strangeness is more poetic and more ancient. The wall allows a god to speak without speaking directly. It is a legal trick wrapped in sacred mystery. That subtlety matters. The divine world in Atrahasis is not simple. The gods disagree. They make oaths, evade oaths, regret decisions, and struggle with the results of their own actions. This is not a universe of clean moral geometry. It is a troubled administration of power, need, fear, and consequence. The flood emerges from that trouble. You see Atrahasis begin his work. Wood must be gathered, reeds must be cut, pitch must be prepared, measurements must be followed. People nearby may ask questions. Why abandon a house? Why build such a thing? Why act as though dry land has betrayed you? He must answer somehow. Perhaps with half-truths, perhaps with ritual language, perhaps with the weary patience of someone who knows that no explanation will sound sane until the rain begins. The vessel becomes a small world made before the old world ends. Its walls enclose possibility. Its darkness holds breath. Animals, seed, family, craft, and memory must be drawn inward. Survival is not only keeping a body alive, it is carrying the pattern of life across a break in time. That is why Atrahasis feels different from a warrior hero. He does not defeat the flood. No human defeats that kind of water. He obeys, prepares, and endures. His wisdom is not domination, it is attention. He notices the warning. He accepts that the impossible may be true. He acts before proof arrives, which is inconveniently often the only time action matters. You sit with the clay as the story darkens, as the tablet is broken, but the shape remains. Complaint leads to creation. Creation leads to multiplication. Multiplication leads to divine disturbance. Disturbance leads to decree. Decree leads to secrecy. Secrecy leads to one listener in the night. Perhaps that is the most unsettling part. The world does not end for everyone all at once. First, it changes for the one who hears. Atrahasis must live for a time between knowledge and catastrophe, surrounded by people who still believe tomorrow will resemble today. He becomes a keeper of terrible information. The air grows still. The city sleeps beside its canals. Overhead, the stars look fixed and harmless. In the hidden chamber of the story, water has already been chosen. Somewhere, a wise man listens through a wall, and the silence around him fills with the weight of everything that must be saved. Ziusudra enters the old Sumerian memory like a figure seen through rain before the rain has started. He's not loud. He does not stride forward with a sword, a boast, or a speech prepared for future generations. He is quiet, devout, attentive, and almost transparent beside the size of what approaches. In that quietness, he becomes unforgettable. You find him in the city of Shuruppak, where the river plain lies open beneath a restless sky. The air is warm and thick. Reeds bend along the waterways. Mud brick houses crowd near lanes worn smooth by feet, hooves, and wheels. Smoke rises from ovens. Grain is measured. Baskets are carried. The day behaves like any other day, which is often how disaster prefers to introduce itself. The Sumerian flood story of Ziusudra survives only in fragmentary form, preserved on broken tablets that leave gaps where the mind naturally leans closer. Scholars from institutions such as Oxford, Yale, and the University of Pennsylvania have studied these fragments alongside later Mesopotamian flood traditions. Records confirm that Ziusudra is one of the oldest known flood survivor figures in cuneiform literature, standing within a tradition that later echoes through other ancient accounts. His name is often understood as connected with long life, or life of distant days. That meaning seems almost too fitting. He is the one who carries breath across the drowning boundary. He is not merely saved from water, he becomes a living bridge between two worlds of time. You step into Shuruppak at dusk. The lanes glow orange, dogs nose around doorways, a child drags a reed toy through the dust. Somewhere, a brewer stirs a vat, and the smell of beer, grain, and smoke drifts through the city. It is ordinary, almost painfully ordinary. The kind of evening no one thinks to remember until everything changes. In the story, the gods decide to send a flood, but the decision does not remain sealed entirely above. A warning reaches Ziusudra. The exact form is damaged by the broken condition of the text. Yet the shape of the tradition is clear enough. One human receives knowledge. He is commanded to preserve life. The world outside the warning continues unaware. This is the terror of selective knowledge. You know what others do not. You hear the future while the present keeps speaking in its usual voice. Someone asks about grain. Someone complains about a debt. Someone repairs a roof badly and calls it good enough. Meanwhile, in the mind of the listener, the river has already risen. A mainstream historical fact gives Shuruppak a stronger outline. Archaeological excavations at the site identified ancient occupation layers and evidence of flood deposits linked to river activity in southern Mesopotamia. Scholars debate their meaning, depth, date, and relation to literary traditions. But the site itself was real and significant. The flood story did not choose an imaginary city floating nowhere. It remembered a place with earth under it. That matters because myth becomes different when tied to a real mound. You can walk the place. You can lift pottery from its dust. You can see how low the land lies. You can imagine water spreading through fields, courtyards, pens, and storage rooms. The story may not be a simple report of one flood, but its fear belongs to a landscape that knew what water could do. Ziusudra's role is not to explain, it is to obey. He receives the warning, prepares, and endures. In the fragmentary Sumerian account, after the flood passes, he offers sacrifice and receives extraordinary favour. He is granted life in a distant place, set apart from ordinary humanity. That ending gives him a strange stillness. He survives, but survival removes him. You can feel the loneliness inside that gift. To live beyond the catastrophe is not the same as returning home. The old streets are gone. The familiar dead are silent. The world has been washed into a new shape. Eternal or extended life, in such a setting, is not simple reward. It is memory without neighbours. A quirky fringe tidbit often circles Ziusudra with unusual enthusiasm. Some modern writers imagine him as the guardian of a hidden archive, a keeper of knowledge from before the flood, perhaps preserving maps, sciences, or forbidden histories. The fragments do not say this plainly, yet the idea grows from a real narrative seed. A survivor does not carry only bodies across disaster. He carries memory, ritual, names, and the possibility of telling. The scholarly debate around Ziusudra is careful and unfinished. Some researchers see his story as the Sumerian ancestor of later Mesopotamian flood narratives. Others emphasize that each version reshapes the survivor for different theological and literary purposes. Another discussion asks whether flood traditions preserve memories of local river catastrophes, older mythic patterns, or a fusion of both. The fragments leave room, and room invites voices. You imagine the preparation without spectacle, no modern emergency lights, no shouted warnings across a public square, only hurried work under an ordinary sky, wood, reeds, rope, bitumen, provisions, living creatures, family, perhaps seeds and tools. The details differ across traditions, but the emotional truth remains steady. A human being must gather the future into a vessel. The The vessel is not only a boat, it is a small ark of continuity. It holds breath, hunger, fear, animal heat, stored food, and the smell of wet materials. It carries the unfinished business of life. It is cramped, unpleasant, and sacred. One suspects the animals did not make the experience more dignified. Then comes the water, not as a clean wall in a painting, not as a neat blue sheet. It comes as darkness, pressure, mud, debris, screaming wind, broken banks, and the terrible disappearance of familiar edges. Streets become channels, fields become grey surfaces, roofs become islands, then vanish. The world loses its lines. You feel the boat lift. The body knows before the mind accepts it. Ground has become motion. The city has become water. The known world loosens beneath you, and every sound outside is swallowed into a single endless force. Rain hammers overhead. Timbers groan. Animals shift in terror. Someone breathes too loudly in the dark. The flood in Ziusudra's story lasts through a sacred measure of days, and then it ends. That ending is almost as frightening as the beginning. Silence after catastrophe has its own voice. The waters withdraw, the air clears, the earth reappears, but it is not the same earth. Mud covers everything. The smell is raw, mineral, and strange. The world seems newly made and recently wounded. Ziusudra steps into that wounded world. He offers thanks. He performs ritual. This detail is important. Survival requires response. The first act is not celebration, not rebuilding, not counting possessions, though someone eventually must do that because humanity cannot resist inventory. The first act is sacred recognition. Life has crossed the boundary. Breath continues. Perhaps this is why Ziusudra remains so quiet and powerful. He is not a conqueror of death. He is a witness to interruption. He proves that time can break and still continue. He stands where the forgotten timeline narrows from vast pre-flood ages into a smaller, more fragile human world. The night around Shuruppak deepens. You hear water in the canals, harmless for now. Lamps flicker behind reed screens. The city sleeps under stars that know nothing of mercy. Somewhere, in the old story, one man listens, prepares, and waits with the preserved breath of the world gathering around him. Black silt waits beneath the surface like a memory the earth never meant to explain clearly. You kneel beside an excavation trench where the walls reveal bands of soil, ash, occupation debris, and river-laid mud. The layers do not speak in sentences. They speak in texture, colour, thickness, and silence. A darker band may mean burning, a pale band may mean rebuilding. A thick, clean layer of silt may mean water came with no interest in human plans. The trench is narrow, but it opens downward through centuries. At the top, disturbed soil lies loose beneath modern feet. Lower down, pottery fragments appear, then brick, then ash, then packed floors where people once swept their rooms and believed the floor was simply the present. Beneath that, sometimes, comes water's signature, fine sediment, spread across a place where daily life had stood. Archaeological records from southern Mesopotamia confirm that several ancient sites contained flood deposits, though not all from the same date or event. Excavations at places such as Shuruppak, Kish, and other settlements revealed layers left by river flooding, each requiring careful interpretation. Scholars connected with major universities and museum projects have long debated whether these deposits relate to literary flood traditions, local disasters, or broader environmental patterns. This is where the story becomes beautifully inconvenient. The earth gives evidence of floods, but not one simple flood covering everything, everywhere at the same time. The rivers of Mesopotamia were powerful, shifting, and unpredictable. They could drown a city district, leave another place untouched, change course, bury fields, and carry away the work of generations. Water is very talented at creating both history and confusion. You imagine an excavator brushing the exposed soil with slow care. Dust rises, a pottery sherd appears, then another. The sun presses on the back of the neck. Someone calls for a measurement. Someone else squints at a notebook and quietly mistrusts yesterday's drawing. Archaeology often looks romantic from a distance. Up close, it involves heat, dirt, patience, and a deep relationship with small labelled bags. A mainstream historical fact rests in the trench. Sir Leonard Woolley's excavations at in the 20th century found a dramatic flood layer, which he connected to ancient flood stories. Later scholars treated that conclusion with caution, noting that the layer likely reflected a major local flood rather than a universal event. This does not make the discovery unimportant. It makes it more human, more regional, and perhaps more believable. At the flood deposit interrupted settlement remains. Above and below it, human occupation continued. That is a powerful image. Life, water, life again. The city does not vanish forever. It drowns in part, suffers, rebuilds, and resumes the stubborn habits of civilization. People return to mud brick because the land allows little else. They build where danger has already spoken, because the same water that destroys also feeds the fields. The scholarly debate remains open across several questions. Did Mesopotamian flood myths grow from memories of one especially devastating regional flood? Many repeated floods, or older symbolic traditions about cosmic destruction. Were the stories shaped by actual river disasters, theological reflection, political memory, or scribal literature? Different scholars give different weight to each possibility. The evidence refuses to line up like well-behaved students. You look again at the silt layer. It has no opinion about myths. It is simply there, fine-grained and level, sealing a moment when moving water covered the ground. Perhaps the people who returned found their floors buried. Perhaps they dug out rooms, salvaged jars, mourned animals, counted losses, and argued about whether the Western Bank should have been repaired sooner. There is always someone who warned everyone, naturally. A quirky fringe tidbit grows out of these flood layers with remarkable persistence. Some modern writers claim that buried silt proves a single worldwide catastrophe, exactly as later traditions describe it. Others claim it hides evidence of an advanced lost age erased by water. The deposits do not support such sweeping certainty, yet their presence keeps the imagination restless. A real layer of flood mud is harder to ignore than a story alone. The truth may be quieter and more haunting. In a low river land, flood memory would not need one universal event to become sacred. Repeated disaster can deepen into a single archetype. Grandparents tell of water rising to the roofs. Priests tell of divine anger. Scribes gather old traditions. Over centuries, many floods become the flood. Memory compresses fear into form. You stand at the edge of a reconstructed ancient house. The door threshold is low. The walls are thick, made of mud brick, vulnerable to soaking and collapse. A family living here would know the sound of rain differently than you do. It would not be cozy background noise against a window. It might be a warning. It might mean canal banks softening, storage jars at risk, livestock panicking, walls melting from below. The smell after a flood would be strong. Wet mud, rotting reeds, spoiled grain, dead animals, smoke from damp fuel, human exhaustion. No neat mythic brightness, just the heavy odour of a world made difficult, and yet, in the aftermath, someone would begin again. Mud would be scraped away, bricks would be shaped, a hearth would be repaired. A child would be told not to step there because the floor was still soft. This is how disaster enters culture, not only through destruction, but through repetition at the family level. A flood becomes a story because someone survives to describe the height of the water. Someone points to a mark on a wall. Someone remembers which neighbour did not return. Someone says the gods were angry. Someone else says the canal bank was neglected. Both explanations may sit beside each other, not comfortably, but together. The ancient tablets transform such experience into cosmic scale. The archaeological layers show you that water truly did invade cities. The myths show you that people interpreted such invasions through divine order, guilt, noise, warning, and renewal. Neither layer cancels the other. Soil and story meet in the same dark trench. For a moment, you hold a piece of pottery from below the flood deposit. It is ordinary, perhaps part of a bowl. Its rim is worn. Someone used it before the water came. Above the silt, another piece appears from a later floor. Someone used that one too. Between them lies interruption, not an end to humanity, but a break deep enough to be remembered. That is the quiet lesson of black silt. History is not smooth. It pauses, fractures, drowns, and starts again with damp hands. The flood in the tablets may be mythic in scale, but it was born in a world where water could truly erase the lines people drew upon the earth. Evening settles over the excavation. The trench shadows lengthen. The exposed layers cool. A breeze carries the smell of dust and distant vegetation. The silt band remains in the wall, thin and mute, neither proving everything nor proving nothing. It only says that water came here once, and people had to decide what that meant. After the waters fall silent, the world does not become peaceful. It becomes wet, empty, and uncertain. You stand on a plain where mud covers the old paths, where walls have slumped into shapeless banks, and where the air smells of silt, broken reeds, and spoiled grain. Silence after disaster is never truly silent. It creaks, drips, settles, and waits for the first human voice brave enough to ask what remains. The flood has passed, but the land has not recovered. Fields lie under a skin of grey mud. Canal markers are gone. Storage rooms have collapsed. Pots are lodged where roofs once stood. A door floats in a shallow pool, turning gently in the current like it is still trying to be useful. Very loyal for a piece of furniture. You walk through the aftermath with slow steps. Each footprint fills with brown water. The old lines of the city are difficult to read. A street has become a channel. A courtyard has become a pond. A shrine wall leans at a tired angle, holding itself upright through habit rather than confidence. The sky is pale and washed clean, but the earth below is heavy with what it has swallowed. In the Sumerian King List, kingship descends again after the flood, and that phrase carries enormous weight. The old order was interrupted, but not erased forever. Authority returns, cities rise again, names begin once more. Records confirm that early Mesopotamian texts often used dynastic sequences to organize political memory, placing cities such as Kish, Uruk, and within a chain of rule. Scholars from major universities have studied this as a way ancient scribes connected mythic beginnings with historical city power. That return of kingship is not a simple restart. It is a wound becoming a system. The world has been cut into a before and a renewed present. The kings after the flood no longer belong to the same immense scale as the older rulers. Their reigns shorten. Their cities become more recognizable. Time itself seems to contract, as if the waters washed away the vastness and left human measure behind. You can feel that contraction in the ruined streets. No one has time for cosmic numbers when grain must be salvaged. A woman searches through collapsed storage jars. A man lifts a beam from the mud. Children stand too quietly near a broken wall. Someone finds a sealed tablet and wipes it with the hem of a garment. Someone else counts animals and discovers that the gods, or simple bad luck, have been selective. The first task is survival. The second is measurement. How much grain remains? How many workers can return? Which canal banks still stand? Which fields can be planted? Which households are gone? Civilization resumes through counting, because grief must eventually meet administration. It feels heartless, but it is also how people live. A mainstream historical fact belongs here. Ancient Mesopotamian cities depended on complex systems of irrigation, storage, labour allocation, and temple or palace administration. When floods damaged canals and fields, recovery required organised effort, not private bravery alone. Research from institutions such as the University of Chicago and Yale has shown how deeply early city life relied on collective labour and recorded management. Rebuilding was not a mood, it was a structure. You imagine the first meeting after the water. Elders gather, priests stand near damaged sacred space, workers wait, tired and mud-streaked. A scribe prepares clay, because even catastrophe must become paperwork. Orders are given for clearing channels, repairing embankments, restoring shrines, and redistributing food. Someone complains that the ration is too small. Someone else says there would be more if people had listened earlier. Humanity has survived. And therefore disagreement survives too. The return of kingship may express the need for command after chaos. A scattered population requires a centre. A broken land requires decisions. The old tradition says kingship descends again, and perhaps that phrase preserved a deeper truth about recovery. After devastation, authority must be made visible. People need to know where to bring labour, offerings, petitions, and blame. A quirky fringed tidbit trails this moment like a reed caught on a branch. Some modern speculators imagine that after the flood, survivors were guided by hidden keepers of pre-flood knowledge, carrying secret sciences into the first restored kingdoms. The tablets do not state this in the dramatic form modern writers prefer, yet the idea reflects a real question inside the ancient material. What, exactly, crossed the flood boundary besides bodies? The scholarly debate turns softly around that question. Some historians see the post-flood descent of kingship as a literary device that separates legendary time from human political history. Others interpret it as a theological claim that order remains divine even after catastrophe. Another view sees it as a scribal effort to connect competing city traditions into one grand sequence. The old text may be doing all these things at once, because ancient writing rarely asks permission to be simple. You move toward the city of Kish in the remembered sequence, where kingship is said to settle after the flood. Kish becomes important in later Mesopotamian political language, and the title, King of Kish, carries prestige beyond the city itself. This is not accidental. A city placed near the renewed beginning gains symbolic force. To rule from such a place is to stand close to the first breath of the restored world. The mood shifts from survival to legitimacy. Who has the right to command the rebuilding? Who speaks for the gods? Who controls labour, water, fields, and memory? These are not abstract questions. They decide who eats, who works, who owns land, who offers sacrifice, and whose version of the disaster becomes official. History is never only what happened. It is also who gets to arrange the tablets. At sunset, the damaged city glows softly. Mud brick walls, even broken ones, catch the light with a strange tenderness. Smoke rises again from repaired hearths. The smell of cooking returns, thin but real. A child laughs for the first time in days, then stops, unsure if laughter is allowed yet. It is slowly, awkwardly. It is ritual follows survival. Offerings are made, shrines are cleaned. The gods must be thanked, appeased, questioned, or perhaps quietly tolerated. People who have endured disaster often do not abandon the sacred. They return to it carrying harder questions. Why this house? Why that family? Why was one voice warned and another left sleeping? The texts do not answer every grief. They give the grief a frame. The flood has made memory sharper. Every rebuilt wall stands against forgetting. Every new tablet pressed into clay becomes an act of defiance. The world was drowned, but not made speechless. Names begin again. Dynasties gather again. The old immense time has narrowed into civic time. measured by kings, canals, storehouses, festivals, and the next harvest. You stand at the edge of a restored canal. Water moves through it carefully, almost innocently, as if it has never harmed anyone. The banks are newly packed. Reeds are tied in place. Workers watch the current with suspicion. They know water feeds and water takes. That knowledge will shape every city that rises from the mud. After the waters, kingship returns not as triumph, but as a fragile arrangement. It is a promise that life can be ordered again, though never without risk. The plain remains low. The rivers remain restless. The tablets remember that authority can descend, vanish, and descend once more. The night cools the wet earth. Stars appear over the repaired roofs. Somewhere, a scribe presses the name of a king into clay, and the mark holds. The world has not been explained. It has only continued. Gilgamesh begins his search not as a calm philosopher, but as a king who has been wounded by friendship. You meet him in the shadow of Uruk's walls, where baked brick catches the late sun, and the city hums beneath the weight of his name. He has power, strength, beauty, fame, and all the usual royal inconveniences, yet none of it protects him from the sight of a companion becoming still. The old epic remembers him as restless after the death of Enkidu. Grief enters him like a second heartbeat. It does not let him sleep properly. It does not let food taste the same. It does not let glory remain convincing. The world that once seemed made for deeds now appears to be moving quietly toward dust. Very inconsiderate, really. But death has never been known for manners. You walk with him beyond the city, away from walls, gardens, and the safe noises of ordinary life. The road becomes strange. Wind moves over open ground. Mountains rise in the distance. The air smells of stone, wild grass, and animal skins. Gilgamesh wears the marks of travel. His hair is unkempt. His body is tired. His mind has become fixed on one question. Must he die too? Records confirm that the Epic of Gilgamesh is one of the great literary works of ancient Mesopotamia, preserved in cuneiform tablets from multiple periods. Scholars at institutions such as Yale, Oxford, and the University of Pennsylvania have studied its layered history, including older Sumerian tales and later Akkadian compositions. The flood survivor in the epic, known in one tradition as Utnapishtim, is closely related to older Mesopotamian figures who crossed the boundary of the Great Flood. This matters because Gilgamesh does not seek a myth for entertainment. He seeks a witness. He wants to find the one human who passed beyond ordinary death and received lasting life. Somewhere at the edge of the world, the survivor remains. If that man was granted escape, perhaps there is a path. Perhaps the rule can bend. Perhaps grief has missed something. You feel the sadness in that hope. It is unreasonable, and therefore deeply human. Gilgamesh's journey carries him through regions that feel less geographical than spiritual. He reaches mountains guarded by terrifying beings. He travels through darkness where the sun itself passes. He comes to a garden of jeweled trees, where beauty feels almost cruel because it cannot answer him. A tavern keeper warns him gently that human life is limited, and that he should accept food, clothing, love, and daily pleasures. Excellent advice, naturally ignored by nearly every desperate hero in literature. The mainstream historical fact beneath this literary journey is that Mesopotamian scribes preserved flood traditions in multiple forms, adapting older stories into new compositions. The Gilgamesh flood account shares many motifs with Atrahasis, including divine decision, warning, a great vessel, preserved life, sacrifice, and divine response. Modern scholarship recognizes these connections while also noting that each version serves its own narrative purpose. In Gilgamesh, the flood story becomes personal. It is no longer only about humanity's survival or divine policy. It becomes the answer given to one grieving king who demands immortality. The old catastrophe is retold as a lesson in human limits. The survivor has crossed the flood. Yes, He has received a strange eternal life, yes, but the path was unique. It was not a recipe. Poor Gilgamesh has travelled very far to discover that exceptions make terrible instructions. You arrive with him at the waters of death, where the edge of the known world seems to breathe cold mist. The boatman guides him across, but even that crossing is delicate and dangerous. Gilgamesh must not touch the fatal waters. Poles are used, then cast away. The journey feels ceremonial, as if he's moving from human restlessness into the deep archive of cosmic memory. A quirky fringe tidbit follows this scene into modern imagination. Some readers have described Gilgamesh's journey as a coded map to a hidden, pre-flood archive, or a lost realm beyond ordinary geography. The text does not give a modern treasure route. Yet it does make the survivor distant, almost unreachable, which invites the thought that flood memory belongs at the edge of human access. The story hides wisdom not underground, but beyond exhaustion. When Gilgamesh meets the survivor, the atmosphere changes. The great hero expects perhaps a dazzling immortal presence, someone radiant and impossible. Instead, he finds a figure who seems strangely human. The survivor asks why Gilgamesh looks so worn. The question is almost dry. One imagines Gilgamesh staring back, thinking that he has crossed darkness, danger, and deathly waters to be asked why he looks tired. Then the flood is recounted. The old story rises again, but now it is framed by a king's fear of death. Utnapishtim tells of divine secrecy, warning, construction, storm, destruction, landing, sacrifice, and the granting of life beyond ordinary human fate. The flood becomes both memory and boundary. It explains why the survivor stands apart, but it does not open the same door for Gilgamesh. A scholarly debate continues around how the epic uses the flood narrative. Some specialists view it as a borrowed myth, inserted to deepen Gilgamesh's search for immortality. Others see it as a deliberate meditation on kingship, wisdom, and the limits of heroic action. Another interpretation stresses the contrast between collective disaster and individual grief. The old flood destroyed a world. Enkidu's death destroys Gilgamesh's world. The scale differs, but the wound rhymes. You sit near the survivor's shore and listen to water moving in the dark. Gilgamesh is offered a test. He must stay awake for several days to prove he can resist the pull that takes all humans. Sleep comes quickly. Of course it does. Sleep is the small cousin of death, and it is undefeated in most bedrooms as well as ancient epics. Loaves of bread are placed beside him to mark each day of failure. The scene is almost tender in its cruelty. Gilgamesh wants eternal life, but cannot master ordinary sleep. His body answers the question before his mind accepts it. He is human, strong, famous, royal, astonishing. Yes, still human. The survivor does not need to defeat him. Weariness does. There remains one more hope, a plant of renewed youth from the deep. Gilgamesh obtains it, and for a moment the story trembles with possibility. Perhaps he will bring it home. Perhaps old age can be softened. Perhaps the king will return with a gift for humankind. Then, while he bathes, a serpent takes the plant. The creature slips away, renewing itself, leaving Gilgamesh with empty hands and a lesson no one requested. The loss is quiet. No battle, no thunder, just a serpent, a plant, and a tired king learning that even what is gained from the deep can be taken by the world, at last. Gilgamesh returns to Uruk. The walls rise before him, solid and beautifully made. He cannot bring immortality. He cannot bring back Enkidu. He cannot become the flood survivor, but he can look at the city, its bricks, its foundations, its human work. The answer left to him is not endless life. It is memory shaped into what people build, write, and pass on. The flood survivor remains distant. Gilgamesh remains mortal. Yet the meeting matters because it reveals the final narrowness of the hidden timeline. The world before the flood may have held immense reigns and divine decisions, but the world of humans must be lived in smaller measures: a wall, a name, a tablet, a friendship, a grief. You stand with the king before Uruk's brickwork as twilight softens the city. The great search has not given him what he wanted. It has given him what can be carried, not immortality of the body, but the fragile endurance of story. Numbers become sacred machinery when they stop behaving like simple counts and begin arranging the mind. You sit before a tablet where names and reigns seem at first to form a plain record. Yet the longer you look, the more the figures begin to feel constructed. They repeat, expand, contract, and gather around patterns that are too deliberate to ignore. Time here is not merely passing. It is being shaped. The old scribes lived in a world where counting mattered intensely. Grain had to be measured, rations had to be distributed, fields had to be surveyed, workers had to be assigned, offerings had to be listed. A careless number could mean hunger, conflict, or an official suddenly developing a very selective memory. Numbers were practical, but practicality did not prevent them from becoming sacred. Records confirm that Mesopotamian mathematics used a base of 60, a flexible system that could handle fractions, large quantities, astronomy, geometry, and administration. Scholars from Yale, Oxford, and the University of Pennsylvania have studied school tablets showing multiplication tables, reciprocal lists, and numerical exercises. These were not people casually guessing at big figures. They had a refined numerical culture, both useful and imaginative. You feel that refinement in the pre-flood reigns. The numbers are vast, but not chaotic. They often appear in rounded forms, shaped by units that belong to scribal mathematics. This suggests that the long reigns may have operated like symbolic architecture. They turn the earliest age into a measured expanse, not a random blur. The old world becomes immense, but organised. That difference matters. Chaos frightens because it has no pattern. Sacred magnitude, however, can soothe even while it unsettles. A reign of many thousands of years may not be believable as ordinary biography, but it can be meaningful as a statement of distance. It tells you that the first age stands far beyond familiar human scale. It is not yesterday with worse plumbing. It is another order of time. You imagine a scribe studying numerical tables under lamplight. His hand is steady. The reed stylus presses signs into a practice tablet. Around him, other students whisper, scrape, erase, and make the soft, small noises of education trying to happen despite childhood. The teacher recites values. The room smells of clay, oil, and concentration. Outside, a donkey brays, contributing nothing to mathematics but considerable atmosphere. A mainstream historical fact belongs in that schoolroom. Cuneiform mathematical tablets show that Mesopotamian scribes were trained through systematic exercises, including lists and problem texts. This training allowed them to manage accounts, land, building projects, and astronomical observation. When such a scribal world creates king lists with immense figures, those figures deserve careful reading. They are not accidents left by people who could not count. The numerical structure also helps separate two kinds of time. The pre-flood kings live inside swollen, patterned duration. Later kings move into shorter, more recognizable spans. This transition is not just chronological, it is emotional. The first age feels like deep water. The renewed age feels like land underfoot. The numbers guide your body through that change without saying so directly. A scholarly debate continues around whether these figures should be read as symbolic, ideological, theological, or distorted memories of old traditions. Some researchers argue that the numbers create a mythic scale meant to glorify early kingship. Others see them as scribal play with sacred arithmetic. Another view considers whether long dynastic memories were compressed under single royal names. None of these possibilities fully closes the question. The clay remains annoyingly elegant. You notice how numbers can carry authority. A precise figure feels official, even when it is impossible. 28,800 years sounds less like fantasy than a very long time, because specificity has a persuasive little costume. Ancient scribes knew the power of exactness. Modern people know it too, especially when faced with invoices, weather reports, and suspiciously confident experts. The old reign lengths may also reflect a desire to total time. By arranging rulers and years, scribes place the vast past under control. They count what cannot be remembered directly. They make deep time answerable to a list. There is something deeply human in that impulse. The unknown becomes less frightening when it can be numbered. Even if the number itself is enormous, a quirky fringe tidbit grows naturally from these patterned figures. Some modern enthusiasts claim the reign lengths encode astronomical cycles, hidden calendars, or messages from a lost civilization. Most such claims go far beyond the evidence and tend to treat ancient scribes like puzzle makers waiting for modern video thumbnails. Yet the instinct is not entirely foolish. The numbers do invite pattern seeking. They were likely meant to feel meaningful. The challenge is patience. Not every pattern is a secret code. Some patterns are cultural habits, scribal conventions, theological gestures, or mathematical elegance. Ancient people did not need modern conspiracies to make numbers mysterious. They already understood that measurement could connect earth, sky, grain, labour, and divine order. You look upward from the tablet to the night sky over Mesopotamia. The stars appear sharp and numerous. The moon moves through its cycle. Planets wander with strange regularity. Priests and scholars watch the heavens, because celestial order matters for ritual, kingship, and omen interpretation. In that world, number becomes a bridge between what is seen and what is believed. The same culture that counted barley could also count months, omens, and rains. This is not contradiction, it is continuity, a field boundary, a temple ration, a lunar cycle, and an antediluvian king may all enter the scribal imagination through ordered marks. Writing and number together make the world less slippery. For a moment, the tablet becomes a machine of memory, not a machine of metal, but of signs. Name, city, reign. Name, city, reign. The repetition turns time like a wheel. Each number locks a ruler into place. Each total adds weight to the forgotten system. The flood then breaks the mechanism and starts another rhythm. There is a sadness in the shrinking of reigns. The great numbers vanish, and human time becomes brief. Kings become mortal in a more obvious way. Cities rise and fail within graspable spans. War, ambition, disease, and succession press close. The world becomes historical, which is to say smaller and more crowded with consequences. Perhaps the Sumerian scribes sensed that the past needed two scales. One scale for the sacred beginning, too large to be held by ordinary years. Another scale for the civic present, where rulers could be remembered, compared, praised, or blamed. The numbers make this distinction visible. They tell you when you are dreaming in mythic time and when you have stepped onto administrative ground. You rest your hands beside the clay. The figures no longer seem merely absurd. They seem ceremonial, instructive, and deliberate. They do not ask you to believe that bodies endured for tens of thousands of years. They ask you to feel that the first order belonged to a different measure. That measure is the real mystery. The lamp burns low. Shadows lengthen across the tablet. The signs remain still, but their numbers continue turning in the mind, like hidden gears inside an ancient clock made of clay. River dust and longing. Fringe shadows gather around the clay because ancient texts leave enough darkness for modern imagination to wander. You see it happen almost naturally. A broken tablet mentions kings before the flood. The reigns are impossibly long. Gods descend into human affairs. A survivor preserves life through catastrophe. Suddenly, someone in a modern room leans forward and whispers that perhaps the old scribes were recording more than myth. You do not need to mock that instinct too quickly. Curiosity often begins as suspicion. People sense that the ancient world is larger than the small summaries they were given in school. They feel the gaps. They notice that civilization seems to rise from mud with astonishing force. They read about old kings, divine councils, hidden warnings, and lost ages, and they wonder whether something has been concealed. Wonder is not the problem. Certainty without evidence is the problem. The tablets do not support every modern claim placed upon them. They do not clearly describe machines, laboratories, flying craft, or engineered workers in the way popular fringe theories sometimes suggest. Scholars trained in Sumerian and Akkadian read these texts within grammar, genre, scribal tradition, and historical context. Research from institutions such as Yale, Oxford, and the University of Pennsylvania continues to show that Mesopotamian literature is rich enough without forcing modern technology into every shadow. Still, the shadows remain interesting. You stand in a quiet study with shelves of books rising around you. A lamp glows over copies of cuneiform texts. Outside the window, a city hums with modern traffic, cables, screens, aircraft, and restless light. Inside, the ancient clay speaks of gods who govern labour, send floods, grant kingship, and place humans into a vast order. It is not surprising that modern readers translate ancient power into modern power. Each age imagines mystery using its own tools. A mainstream historical fact helps steady the room. The Sumerian and Akkadian tablets were written by trained scribes working within temple, palace, school, and literary traditions. Their language uses divine imagery, poetic structure, numerical systems, and mythic motifs familiar within ancient Mesopotamian culture. This does not make the texts less profound. It makes them more precise. They belong to a world with its own logic. Fringe interpretation often begins when that ancient logic is ignored. A god becomes an alien engineer because modern readers struggle to imagine divine beings as ancient people did. Long reigns become literal non-human lifespans because symbolic number is treated like a passport record. A flood survivor becomes the keeper of advanced science because survival itself feels too simple. The result may be entertaining, but it often flattens the older imagination. That older imagination deserves more respect. It was not primitive confusion waiting for modern rescue. It was a complete way of thinking about labour, authority, water, time, divinity, and mortality. Its strangeness does not need to be upgraded into science fiction to matter. It's already strange on its own terms. A quirky fringe tidbit worth examining is the claim that the ancient gods called the Anunnaki were visitors from another planet who created humans as miners or servants. This idea became popular in recent decades, especially through reinterpretations that mix selected tablet passages with speculation. The actual Mesopotamian texts present these divine figures in shifting theological roles, not as a single clear group of space travellers. The modern story is more a mirror of modern anxieties than a direct translation. Yet mirrors can reveal something. Why does this idea appeal so strongly? Perhaps because it turns human hardship into evidence of cosmic exploitation. Perhaps because it offers a hidden plot behind ordinary suffering. Perhaps because it makes ancient myth feel like forbidden history. And forbidden history has always had excellent marketing. The appeal is emotional before it is scholarly. The open scholarly debate is not about spaceships, but about how ancient people understood divine hierarchy and human dependence. Specialists still discuss how different gods and divine groups function across periods, cities, and literary genres. The same names can shift in meaning. Roles change. Texts preserve local traditions and later reinterpretations. Mesopotamian religion was not a single fixed chart. It was a living system with regional memory, ritual practice, and centuries of scribal revision. You move from the modern study back into an imagined archive. Clay tablets sit on shelves or in baskets. Some are administrative, some are literary, some are exercises from schoolrooms. Many are damaged. A scribe's world is not a secret vault of hidden technology. It is a working environment of record-keeping, memorization, copying, correction, and devotion. The mystery lies not in machines, but in continuity. There is another fringe shadow, softer but equally persistent. It claims that the flood erased a global advanced civilization, leaving only fragments in myths across the world. The idea is seductive because flood stories do appear in many cultures, and ancient disasters did shape human memory. But shared human experience can produce similar stories without requiring one lost empire. People everywhere know water, danger, survival, and loss. The stronger question is more delicate. How do memories of real disasters become sacred stories? How do local catastrophes grow into universal images? How do communities turn mud on the floor into cosmic judgment? These questions do not close the imagination, they deepen it. They allow both earth and story to speak. You hear rain begin against a roof in the modern room. The sound is gentle, not threatening. Still, it changes the mood. Every flood myth depends on that change. Water becomes more than water when it crosses a boundary. A canal is useful. A river is fertile. Rain is welcome. Then the line breaks, and the same element becomes a destroyer. Ancient people did not need global theories to understand terror. They needed only low ground and a dark sky. Fringe readings also grow from disappointment with ordinary history. Ordinary history can seem slow. It speaks of pottery styles, settlement patterns, grain accounts, and administrative tablets. It asks for patience, and patience is not always fashionable. But the ordinary evidence is where the ancient world becomes real. A ration list may not sound thrilling, yet it tells you who worked, who ate, who depended on whom, and how a city breathed. A lost alien empire is dramatic. A woman receiving barley rations in a temple economy is historical. Both may invite wonder, but only one is firmly held by the clay. You do not have to choose boredom in order to reject fantasy. The actual tablets contain gods speaking through walls, kings ruling beyond human scale, cities chosen before the flood, divine councils deciding human fate, and survivors placed at the edge of mortality. That is not dull. If anything, it is almost offensively rich. The wiser path is to let the ancient material remain ancient. Do not drag it too quickly into modern categories. Do not bleach it into mere superstition either. Let it be what it is, a record of how one of the world's earliest literate civilizations imagined the deep past, divine order, human labour, and catastrophic renewal. The shadows around the clay are not enemies. They remind you that the past still provokes longing. People want the tablets to reveal a hidden timeline, because the tablets themselves suggest that history is layered. There is the visible past of kings and cities. Beneath it lies sacred memory. Beneath that lies fear of water, work, death, and silence. You close the book in the study. The rain softens. The lamp hums faintly. The clay remains in the mind, neither confirming the loudest speculations nor surrendering all mystery to sober explanation. It waits between them, patient and brown, refusing both boredom and exaggeration. Perhaps the most forgotten truth is not that ancient visitors shaped the world. Perhaps it is that ancient humans, without modern machines, shaped meanings vast enough to haunt us still. Scholars, doubt, and reverence sit together at the same table, though they do not always enjoy one another's company. You enter a reading room where the lights are soft, the air is dry, and the past lies in fragments under careful watch. Clay tablets rest in trays. Photographs are spread beside transliterations. A magnifying glass waits near a pencil. Somewhere, a clock ticks with the confidence of a device that has never tried to date a broken flood deposit. This room is quieter than the ancient plane, but not less alive. Here, The old timeline is not received in a single breath. It is tested, compared, questioned, and rebuilt sign by sign. A missing wedge can change a name. A damaged line can alter a reign. A variant copy can complicate what seemed clear. Scholarship moves slowly because the evidence itself is slow. The first discipline at the table is archaeology. It asks where things were found, how deep they lay, what surrounded them, and what material world held them. A tablet without context is still valuable, but a tablet found within a layer, a building, or a collection history can speak more fully. Archaeology listens to soil, brick, pottery, bone, ash, seed, and silt. It is the art of making the ground confess gently. A mainstream historical fact belongs here. Excavations across Iraq and surrounding regions have revealed vast archives of cuneiform tablets, from royal inscriptions and literary works to school exercises and administrative accounts. Research associated with institutions such as the University of Chicago, Yale, Oxford, and the University of Pennsylvania has helped build the modern understanding of Mesopotamian cities, languages, economies, and myths. The forgotten timeline survives because many kinds of evidence meet. The second discipline is philology, the careful study of ancient language. It is less muddy than archaeology, though not necessarily less exhausting. Philologists compare signs, grammar, word forms, scribal habits, and parallel texts. They ask whether a line belongs to Sumerian tradition, Akkadian retelling, later copying, or school transmission. They spend years learning to hear a dead language breathe through broken marks. Glamorous, rarely, essential, absolutely. You imagine a scholar leaning over a tablet photograph, tracing signs with silent attention. The sign may be clear, or it may be damaged at the edge. It might be one word. It might be another. The difference could shift a city, a god, or a number. The scholar hesitates, checks a sign list, consults a parallel copy, frowns slightly, and resists the urge to invent certainty. This restraint is one of the quieter virtues of serious study. The third discipline is geology and environmental history. It asks what the rivers were doing when cities rose, moved, or suffered. It studies sediments, channels, rainfall, sea levels, soils, and salinity. It reminds everyone that Mesopotamian civilization was never just a human project. It was a negotiation with water, heat, and alluvial land. The old flood traditions become richer when the rivers are allowed into the room as witnesses. A scholarly debate remains open about how to connect textual flood traditions with physical flood evidence. Some researchers emphasize local river disasters and the memory they may have produced. Others focus on literary inheritance, where flood motifs move through scribal culture and become theological narrative. Still others ask how environmental instability shaped ideas about divine anger, kingship, and renewal. The debate endures because no single trench or tablet can carry the whole burden. The fourth discipline is the history of religion. It does not ask whether the gods were real in a modern scientific sense. It asks how ancient people experienced divine presence, ritual obligation, fear, hope, and order. It studies temples, offerings, hymns, myths, festivals, and royal claims. It asks why kingship descends from heaven, why floods become verdicts, and why survival requires sacrifice. It treats belief not as decoration, but as structure. A quirky fringe tidbit drifts into the room, unable to resist joining the discussion. Some claim that scholars hide the real meaning of the tablets because it would overturn history. This idea is popular, dramatic, and usually unsupported. In truth, specialists argue constantly, publish disagreements, revise translations, and point out uncertainty with almost heroic persistence. Secret keepers generally do not spend their lives footnoting each other in public. Still, The suspicion tells you something about the emotional power of these texts. People want the tablets to reveal a hidden truth. They sense that official history can feel too neat, too narrow, too dry. The irony is that real scholarship is not neat at all. It is full of gaps, disputes, revised readings, and careful admissions of ignorance. The mystery is not being hidden. It is being handled with gloves. You sit at the table and let doubt become a form of reverence. To doubt is not always to dismiss. Sometimes it is to honour the distance between yourself and the ancient world. A careless answer may feel satisfying, but it can crush the strangeness of the evidence. A careful question keeps the past alive. It allows the tablet to remain difficult. There is also humility in the brokenness of the record. Most ancient voices are gone, many tablets are lost, many sites were damaged by time, erosion, looting, war, and old excavation methods. Even preserved texts often survive as later copies of older compositions. The past comes to you through accidents. Fire hardens tablets, collapse buries archives, floods destroy some things and seal others. History has a very odd filing system. The reading room grows darker outside the windows. A scholar turns a page, another adjusts a lamp. The tablet remains quiet, but around it disciplines continue their slow conversation. Archaeology says, here is the layer. Philology says, here is the word. Geology says, here is the water. Religious history says, here is the meaning humans made from fear. None is enough alone. Perhaps that is why the flood tradition endures so strongly. It lives where many forms of knowledge meet. It is literary, because it is shaped as story. It is religious, because divine will fills it. It is environmental, because water haunts the land. It is political, because kingship returns through city order. It is psychological, because humans remember disaster by turning it into pattern. The forgotten timeline is therefore neither a simple code nor a simple mistake. It is a structure assembled by ancient scribes, preserved through copying, buried in earth, recovered by excavation, translated with difficulty, and debated by modern minds. Every stage adds distance, or every stage also adds wonder. You feel the calm seriousness of the work. No thunder, no dramatic revelation, only clay, notes, lamps, and patient disagreement. Yet this quiet labour has brought the pre-flood names back into speech. It has allowed Eridu, Shuruppak, Atrahasis, Ziusudra, and the strange old sequence of kingship to rise again from storage rooms and trenches. Reverence does not require certainty. In fact, certainty may sometimes be too small for the ancient world. Better to let the evidence breathe. Better to accept that some questions remain open, not because scholars are hiding answers, but because the past has not given them. The clock continues ticking in the reading room. A tablet is returned to its tray. The lights dim. Doubt stays behind with reverence, both watching over the clay. Between them, the old timeline remains unfinished, not broken beyond use, but incomplete in a way that keeps calling you closer. The flood becomes a gate in memory, not simply because water destroys, but because it divides the world into two different kinds of time. On one side, the old kings stretch across impossible ages, cities receive sacred rule, and the human story feels vast, remote, and almost dreamlike. On the other side, dynasties shorten, rulers grow more familiar, and history begins to walk on narrower streets. You stand before that gate as if before a wall of dark water held upright in the mind. It does not roar, it waits. Behind it lies the deep past, arranged in names too large for ordinary memory. In front of it lies the world of rebuilt cities, measured reigns, damaged fields, treaties, inscriptions, temple accounts, and people arguing about grain with admirable consistency. Humanity survives and immediately resumes being very human. The ancient flood is therefore more than a disaster. It is a boundary marker. The tablets use it to separate mythic scale from civic memory. Before the waters, kingship belongs to a realm of sacred magnitude. After the waters, kingship continues, but within a world that can be managed by lists, archives, and political claims. The flood makes time legible by cutting it. A mainstream historical fact rests beneath this structure. Mesopotamian scribes often organized the past through lists, dynasties, city sequences, and divine legitimization, turning memory into ordered tradition. Researchers at major institutions such as Oxford, Yale, and the University of Chicago have shown how king lists and literary texts helped cities understand authority, antiquity, and political change. The flood belongs inside that habit of ordering the past through meaningful division. You feel the power of such division in the body. People do not remember life as one smooth flow. They say, before the illness, before the war, before the house burned, before the river came. A single event becomes the hinge on which memory turns. Everything earlier grows golden, strange, or fearful. Everything later feels like survival. For ancient Mesopotamia, the flood served as that hinge at a cosmic scale. It allowed scribes to imagine a time so old that ordinary evidence could not reach it, then connect that time to the cities they knew. The Great Water did not merely erase, it explained the gap. Why are the earliest rulers so immense? Because they belong to the time before. Why do later kings look human? Because they belong to the time after. Convenient, yes. Also deeply poetic. You walk along a canal at twilight, where water reflects the bruised colours of the sky. The same element that nourishes the field also carries the image of destruction. A farmer opens a small gate and lets water move into a channel. The flow is controlled, measured, useful. Yet everyone knows control is temporary. Too little water means famine. Too much means ruin. The river is always both servant and judge. This double nature gives the flood its emotional force. Water is not an enemy from outside the world. It is the world's own gift becoming excessive. It is blessing crossing a line. That is why the image unsettles so quietly. The thing that sustains life can become the thing that takes it away. Ancient people did not need abstract philosophy for that. They had river banks. A scholarly debate remains active around whether the flood boundary in the King List reflects a specific inherited tradition, a theological division of time, a political tool for organizing dynasties, or a memory shaped by repeated regional disasters. Some researchers emphasize literary structure, others stress environmental experience. Another approach asks how scribes used catastrophe to give legitimacy to later rule. The best answer may be layered, like the soil itself. A quirky fringe tidbit appears at the edge of this gate. Some modern writers speak of the flood as a reset of human civilization, imagining that whole libraries, sciences, and kingdoms vanished beneath the water. The tablets do not give that claim in the dramatic form often advertised. Yet the idea persists because the ancient texts do describe a genuine reset of order. Kingship descends again. The world resumes under altered conditions. Mythically speaking, history restarts. The difference is important. A mythic reset is not the same as a proven global collapse of advanced technology. It is a narrative device, a sacred memory pattern, and perhaps a response to real disasters. But it still says something profound. It says that civilization knows itself to be breakable. It says that order, once lost, must be given again. You pause beside a clay tablet drying in the last light. On its surface, signs hold names and numbers. The clay was once river mud. That fact matters. The same watery landscape that threatened memory also supplied the material for memory's preservation. Floodplain mud became writing. Destructive earth became durable record. There is an elegance there, almost too neat. But ancient life often enjoyed such ironies. The flood as memory gate also changes humanity's role. People are not simply victims, they are carriers. They carry life through the break, but also ritual, language, fear, and explanation. A survivor matters because he becomes the throat through which the earlier world can speak. Without a survivor, the flood is only silence. With a survivor, it becomes history, myth, warning, and inheritance. You can imagine a child hearing the tale generations later. The room is dim, the walls smell of warm clay. An elder speaks of the time when water covered everything known. The child asks whether the old kings were real. The elder perhaps smiles, perhaps grows stern, perhaps says that some things are remembered because they are true, and other things are true because they are remembered. Annoying answer, but not a useless one. The gate remains difficult because modern minds want it to open cleanly. Was there a real flood? Was it symbolic? Was the timeline political? Was it sacred? The old tablets do not choose one modern category. They hold event, memory, theology, and political order together. They preserve a world where facts and meanings were not enemies. They were woven reeds in the same mat. You listen to the night sounds of the river country. Frogs call from the marsh. Insects tremble in the reeds. A boat knocks softly against a post. Somewhere, a family settles under a roof repaired many times. The water moves through darkness with deceptive gentleness. It has fed cities, broken cities, carried boats, drowned fields, and filled the clay from which names were written. Perhaps that is why the flood stands at the centre of the forgotten timeline. It is not only an ending, it is the event that makes beginnings possible again. It closes the immeasurable age and opens the recordable one. It takes the first order out of reach, then leaves behind a world hungry for lists, kings, walls, rituals, and memory. The gate is not locked. It is simply made of water, and water never holds one shape for long. You can approach it through archaeology, myth, river history, royal tradition, or quiet imagination. Each path reaches the same shimmering boundary, where the ancient mind says that something was lost, something endured, and something began again. The canal darkens completely. The sky fills with stars. On the far bank, a lamp appears in a doorway. The flood remains in memory like a shadow behind civilization, softening every claim of permanence. It reminds you that history does not begin only with creation. Sometimes it begins again after loss. The story not yet complete rests in the clay like a breath held across ages. You sit with the tablets one final time, not to force them into certainty, but to let their broken patience do its work. The room is quiet, the lamp is low. Beyond the glass, the world has moved on into engines, satellites, electric light, and small glowing screens that somehow still cannot stop people from losing their keys. The ancient clay remains unimpressed. It remembers in fragments. A city receives kingship. A king rules for an impossible span. A sacred order moves across the plain. Humans labour beneath the gods. Noise rises. A warning passes through secrecy. Water comes. A survivor endures. Then rule returns smaller, more human, more vulnerable. The whole sequence feels like a dream that has been copied carefully by people who believed dreams could carry truth. Records confirm that cuneiform tablets preserve some of the earliest written attempts to organize deep human memory. From royal lists to flood traditions and mythic accounts of creation, scholars at institutions such as Oxford, Yale, Stanford, and the University of Chicago continue to study these texts through archaeology, language, environmental history, and religion. Their work does not remove the mystery. It gives the mystery a clearer outline. You look again at the surface of the tablet. The signs are small, but the questions are immense. What did the scribes think they were preserving? A sacred chronology, a political theology, a memory of disasters, a mythic explanation of labour, a warning about noise, pride, and the unstable bargain between humans and the world that feeds them. Perhaps all of these are true in different ways, The forgotten timeline is not a straight road. It is more like an old river system with channels splitting, drying, joining, and disappearing beneath silt. One channel leads to real cities, another to divine assemblies, another to flood layers in the earth, another to kings whose reigns belong to symbolic time, another to modern speculation, where curiosity sometimes outruns evidence and waves cheerfully from the distance. You do not need to chase every channel tonight. The oldest stories are not always solved by speed. They ask for slowness, for humility, for the willingness to stand before a broken line and admit that the missing part may remain missing. That admission is not failure, it is the beginning of reverence. A mainstream historical fact remains gently solid beneath your feet. Southern Mesopotamia produced the earliest known urban societies and one of the earliest writing systems, and its scribes used clay tablets to preserve administration, literature, law, religion, and royal memory. The flood traditions belong to that extraordinary scribal world. They are not isolated fantasies. They are part of a civilization deeply concerned with order, survival, divine will, and the fragility of cities. Yet even the best scholarship leaves open rooms. A continuing debate asks how much of the pre-flood tradition reflects inherited myth, remembered environmental catastrophe, mathematical symbolism, political construction, or theological imagination. The tablets do not answer in one voice. They answer like a chorus heard through walls, beautiful, distant, and slightly out of tune. A quirky fringe tidbit still lingers near the door. Some people imagine that one final missing tablet will someday reveal the entire hidden history before the flood, naming lost rulers, lost sciences, and the true origin of humanity. That is unlikely in such a tidy form. Ancient discovery rarely behaves like a treasure chest opening at the correct musical moment. More often, it is a chipped fragment, a new reading, a revised date, or a quiet correction in a scholarly article. Still, the dream of a missing tablet is not foolish in spirit. It expresses a deeper human longing. We want the past to speak fully. We want the dead to finish their sentences. We want the floodgate to open without drowning us. We want to know whether the old scribes were remembering history, shaping myth, or listening to something still older than both. You imagine the Sumerian plain under night. The rivers move in darkness. Reeds brush together along the banks. A temple platform stands above low roofs. Somewhere, a scribe sets down his stylus and flexes his hand. The clay before him is damp, marked, and vulnerable. He may be copying an older tradition. He may be preserving what his teacher taught him. He may not feel mysterious at all. He may simply be tired. This is often how wonder survives. Not through grand revelation, but through tired hands doing careful work. The scribe leaves the tablet to dry. Time takes it. Fire may harden it. Earth may bury it. Empires rise above it. Speak other languages. Worship other gods. Break other walls and disappear. The tablet waits beneath debris, holding names whose original voices are gone. Later, someone finds it. Someone cleans it. Someone reads part of it, misreads part of it, corrects the reading, argues politely or not so politely, and the ancient world stirs again. The story is not complete because history itself is not a closed room. New excavations may shift the picture. New joins between fragments may restore a line. New environmental studies may clarify old flood deposits. New translations may soften or sharpen old assumptions. The forgotten timeline remains alive precisely because it is unfinished. Perhaps that is appropriate. A flood story should not end too neatly. Water leaves marks, but it also removes evidence. It carries away the proof you hoped would remain. It leaves behind silt, memory, and questions shaped like absence. You sit in the low light and let the clay become quiet again. It has shown you kings before the flood, cities touched by sacred rule, human labour beneath divine expectation, the terror of too much noise, the loneliness of survival, and the return of order from mud. It has not given you one final answer. It has given you something older and perhaps more useful. It has given you a pattern. The pattern says that civilizations remember themselves through loss. They build walls because walls fall. They write names because names vanish. They tell flood stories because water came, or because water might come, or because every human world knows it can be overwhelmed. And perhaps, somewhere beneath the plain, another fragment still waits, not to solve everything, only to deepen the silence. The wind down begins softly. As the lamp lowers and the room grows kind around you, there is nothing more you need to hold tightly now. The clay can rest. The rivers can move in their ancient beds. The names of kings can drift back into the dark, no longer demanding belief, only asking to be remembered with care. You may let the cities fade one by one. Eridu returns to its marsh water. Sippa sinks into morning light. Shuruppak grows quiet beneath a sky washed clean by old rain. Uruk keeps its walls in the distance, warm with the last colour of evening. The tablets lie still, small and brown, carrying more time than any hand should be able to hold. Perhaps the flood was memory. Perhaps it was warning. Perhaps it was a wound that became a story, then a story that became a gate. You do not need to choose now. The ancient world is allowed to remain ancient. The unanswered question is allowed to breathe. Your own room is here again. The air is calm. The night outside is gentle. Somewhere far away, water moves through reeds, and a scribe who never knew your name finishes a line in wet clay. The mark remains. The silence deepens. The past does not close. It only grows softer, and perhaps the story is not yet complete. End of script. Good night.